Sure.
I'll take it from here, Steve. Sorry.
Sure, no problem. No problem.
I'll-
Okay, I'm just going to go by who I can see on my screen. Okay, Mr. Rowena. Oh, I'll take that as a present. JJ.
Present.
Okay, Mr. Mushak,
Here.
Mr. Cantor,
Here.
Mr. Schulman,
Here.
and that's all I see, which is one.
I think that's correct. Brian Baxendale, unfortunately, is out with COVID. Hector has indicated that he had a conflict and he couldn't make it. Tammy originally indicated that she couldn't make it, but has recently told me she thinks she can be here by about 7:30. And we all got an email from Darius indicating he's stuck in traffic and he'll join the meeting when he gets home. If there's anyone here for the hearing 2022-13 SP, the Associated Food Distributors Company, that public hearing has been removed from tonight's agenda at the applicant's request. In addition, excuse me, items D and E, I'm going to move up after item A number 4. That is after Robert Gardella, 48 Calf Pasture Beach Road. Those, I believe, are going to be very quick items. With that, I also want to note that Commissioner Wells is here with us as well. But given the absences, we have JJ, you'll be able to participate as a voting member throughout the evening, as will Darius when he's able to join us. All right, with that, we do have a second public hearing. Let me explain how we run the public hearings. We first allow the applicant to make a presentation. In the case of this particular hearing, I think that's going to be fairly brief. During that presentation, if commission members have questions, they're free to ask them at any time. When the presentation is complete, we will open it up to the public for comments. Typically, we do not limit the length of comment that the public can make. We do ask that you make an attempt to say everything you need to say as briefly as possible. In the event that there are a significant number of people commenting, that allows us to move this forward fairly quickly. You should also know that anyone from the public who's speaking, this is not a conversation between you and the commission members. It's simply your comments on the application. And after all members of the public have had an opportunity to speak, the applicant will have an opportunity to respond to any comments that have been made by the public. Again, I think this is a fairly straightforward application, and there aren't going to be a lot of people speaking. We ask that, again, your comments be as brief as possible, but make sure that you take the opportunity to say everything that's important to you, because we do only give you one opportunity to speak. We also ask that you keep your comments polite, so that they're not objectionable to anyone. And with that, this is 2022-11 SUBD Jennifer Lynn Iana Cone, 162 Strawberry Hill Avenue. This is a 2-lot re-subdivision. And I would call on the applicant or the applicant's representative to make the presentation.
Good evening. This is Chris Iannicone. Hopefully you can hear me.
We can.
Okay. I was actually waiting for Mr. Martin from Grumman Engineering. I guess he's not here just yet. Ah, here he goes.
I'm here.
Okay. All right. It's all yours, Dean.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Dean Martin with Grumman Engineering LLC. I'm the site engineer, design engineer in this project, which is a 2-lot re-subdivision located at 162 Strawberry Hill Avenue. This property is just to the west of the Nathan Hale School. It's a 25,000 square foot property. We're breaking it into 2 lots. Each lot would be over 10,000 square feet. And
Sorry. Is that your dogs? Are those your dogs barking?
they're down in my
sorry.
basement.
Because I can't really
Yep.
understand what you're saying because the dogs are coming through on the mic.
I
And they may
apologize.
be agreeing with your, they may be here for the public hearing, and I can't tell if they're agreeing or disagreeing. but
Well, hopefully they're agreeing. They're in the other end of the house.
They're loud. Okay.
I
All right,
apologize. I think
No,
they're
it's
gone.
just distracting if you want to get your message across. That's all.
Yes, I don't know if I'm able to share the screen, but I could pull up the site plan. If I'm able to, I don't know. Do I have that ability, Michelle?
Yes, you should be able to.
Okay, can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay, this is actually the sediment erosion control plan. Let me see if I can pull up the other plan. Here we go. Here we go. Here's the site plan. Again, Strawberry Hill Avenue is at the bottom of the page. 2 perpendicular lots. On the eastern side of the property is the Nathan Hale School. What we've shown is 2 representative single-family dwellings. These particular buildings are approximately 1,575 square feet each, with driveways coming off from Strawberry Hill Avenue. The lot number 1A, which is to the east, it will utilize an existing curb cut off Strawberry Hill. There will be a new curb cut for the lot number 1B. Both lots will be served by municipal sanitary sewer, municipal water, and electric, all off Strawberry Hill Avenue. In the south side of the dwellings, we proposed or depicted some stormwater retention, which is sized to provide a 0 increase in runoff from the property during the 2 through 100 year design storms. And this was all done in accordance with the City of Norwalk drainage manual. These plans and the drainage systems have been reviewed and approved by the Department of Public Works. Each lot meets the area requirements in this zone, which is a B zone, meets all the setback requirements. The 50-foot diameter circle is met for both lots. Let me just go to the second plan. This is the erosion control plan, which depicts our erosion control features, which are siltation fencing along the downhill side on lot number 1A, between lots 1A and 1B, and then temporary topsoil stockpiles in the south end of both lots. We also have anti-tracking pads for both proposed driveways. The existing curbing along this side of Strawberry Hill Avenue is concrete curbing, which is required in this area. The majority of the existing sidewalk is paved or asphalt. Per the request of Department of Public Works, we are proposing a new concrete sidewalk and snow shelf on the south side of lot number 1B. That was their requirement. And that's pretty much it. It's fairly straightforward. Again, 2 proposed lots. The lots all meet the zoning requirements. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions from the commission members?
Mike Mushak here. I don't have any questions. I want to just thank you for adding color to the drawings because it makes such a big difference. The last two or three drawings that you showed were easy to read, and that doesn't happen very often. So maybe staff can remind applicants to do this. I can see you just use magic markers, which is all you need to get the differentiation. Like sometimes we can't even tell what's a building on these drawings. So anyway, thank you.
You're welcome.
Anything else from the commission members? All right, if not, Michelle, would you explain how the public can participate? By the way, we would ask that members of the public supply their name and their address at the beginning of their remarks.
So if you'd like to participate, please use the raise your hand feature at the bottom of your screen, and then we will bring you over to speak. We have Leslie Walks. You just have to unmute yourself, Leslie.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so you're building this next to the tennis court. Is that where you are, next to the tennis court by the school?
The question can be answered after all the comments have been made. But again, this is not interactive. But ask the question, it will be answered later.
Okay, so my name is Leslie Walks. My property is in back of where you're building this. I'm very adjacent to the tennis court. So I just want to know how far back you're coming to my property, from my property backyard. And will you knock down all the trees that's there now?
Okay, is that it, Mr. Walks?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone else who wishes to speak?
Someone from ENNA.
Good evening, Diane Cece from East Norwalk. I wonder if it's possible for my comments, would the applicant be able to share that site plan again on the screen? I have 3 questions / comment. So I just want to address looking at it if it's possible.
Diane, which of the drawings is it you want to see?
It's the right there. Mhm.
Oh,
This
okay.
one.
Thanks very much. So I have 3 comments / questions for Mr. Martin, and if they can be addressed in the rebuttal or response. The first one is that you indicated the existing curb cut there for this parcel. And I think I have the lay of the land right. My question would be, would the applicant consider a shared driveway? I'm not quite sure how that works, but I'm suggesting if that's a possibility, would they consider it? Because I think if I'm looking at this correctly, to the left of this, and I'm trying to orient it on Strawberry Hill, I think is the curb cut for the school. And then to the right of this property is the, I forget the name of the street that's right there. So if we're not seeing the whole picture here, but I think that then, right in a row, there would be 4 entrances and exits. So that's my first question / comment. And then Mr. Martin indicated in terms of runoff, because flooding and runoff and stormwater is a serious issue in East Norwalk, he indicated that there would be a 0 increase and they're complying with the city standards, which I appreciate. But I wonder if they're doing anything on the property that's actually going to reduce the amount of runoff compared to what the property is producing today. That's my second question. And my third question has to do with trying to look at it here on the screen. Mr. Martin indicated a change or an addition to the sidewalk in front of the parcel on the right, when you're looking at the screen. And I wanted to know if that aligns then with the existing sidewalk. And I wanted to know if that sidewalk meets the city standard of, I believe it's 7 feet with 5 foot unobstructed. So if they, and if it doesn't, could it be expanded to that? Because this is a safe routes to school street. And just to, I guess, answer the question. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have to unmute yourself, Zoom user.
I think I just did.
Okay.
Am I on?
Yes,
Yep.
you are.
Okay. My name is Mary Ann Montero and I'm at 14 Lindcrest Drive and I am right behind where all this is going on. My question is, are they going to leave the trees that are healthy and take down the rest of the mess that's falling down? And are they going to clean up all the debris that's against the wall that's falling apart? That's it.
Thank you.
If anybody else would like to participate, please use the raise your hand feature. Not seeing anyone else.
Okay. Then let's turn it back to Mr. Martin.
Okay, can everybody hear me?
Yeah, can you take down the drawing or do you need it to respond?
No. Okay, first question regarding Mr. Walks. Again, these are not site-specific plans that were presented. These are only for representative purposes to show that, you know, properties could be developed. But what we've shown on this plan is to go back approximately 150 feet from the front, which would encompass our house site and drainage, that type of thing. You know, there is a shed that's in the backyard, which would be removed as part of the, you know, process. The existing curbs or existing sidewalks along Strawberry Hill Avenue, currently there is a 7-foot asphalt sidewalk. And I've gotten a couple of different responses. The Public Works Department, which responded to us and is actually signed off on our plan, requested that since we already have an existing concrete curbing which runs the whole length of the property, and that the existing asphalt sidewalk is in very good shape, their only request was that, as shown on the site plan, that on the southern side of lot 1B, we replace it with a 4-foot concrete sidewalk and a 3-foot snow shelf. That's what's required in this type of roadway, which is a based on the city standard for this roadway. Subsequently, the traffic department gave us another review, which they wanted a 5-foot concrete sidewalk. So it may have to be a 5-foot sidewalk, but it will conform to whatever the city requires. Our sidewalks will conform. as far as widths go and materials. And that's part of the city's approvals that we've gotten, is that everything conforms. Runoff, we did, as a matter of fact, in our drainage report, which was provided, as I stated earlier, we met the standards for the no increase in runoff. We've actually reduced the runoff on both lots. Lot number 1A, the runoff was reduced in the 2 through 100-year storm, approximately 8% over what's leaving the property now. On lot number 1B, the reduction goes from in a 2-year storm, there's basically, we're meeting the zero increase in runoff. When we get up to a 100-year storm, we're reducing the runoff by approximately 7%. So we are, reducing a little bit. This property is somewhat unique. The land slopes from west to east, so we get a lot of runoff from the neighboring properties, which in the rear of this property crosses over our property. There's not a lot we can do about that, but as far as what we can do with our water that's on our site, we are reducing runoff. And as far as the trees on the property, again, this is not site specific, but if the commission wants to make a condition that debris along the stone wall in the rear be removed, that's something that could be done. We're not proposing to really do anything in the backyard based on this particular site plan. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions from commission members?
I had, excuse me, I had one question. The lots were so vanilla looking. I didn't really think of this when you were giving the presentation, but do you have a proximity map so that we and the public can see where they are located with regard to Strawberry Hill and the surrounding properties? Am I on mute still?
No, we can hear you.
Yeah, the actual, I don't know if I had a location map. There we go. So here's.
That's better.
Right, so there's the property. To the east is the Nathan Hale School. The adjacent to the property on the west side is more residential lots. There's no street until you get all the way down to Tierney Street, which is a couple hundred feet to the west. And the driveway to the Nathan Hale School is on the opposite side of that play field, closer to the school, so which is about 150 or so feet away to the east.
And Dean, do you know which property it is that Mr. Walks was speaking about?
Yeah, he was on the eastern lot. His property is like maybe the big white house in the back. I'm thinking somewhere in the back. He's more to the east of this, on the other, more to the right, maybe next house over. I think that might be Mr. Walk's property, somewhere in there.
Okay. And if you wouldn't mind, one more thing, just run your cursor down the approximate location of the stone wall you're talking about, or maybe you could blow that up a little bit so we can see it.
Yeah, it's along the back of the rear of the property. It's basically along that tree line, which runs east to west. There's a stone wall.
All right, thank you very much.
Other questions for Mr. Martin? I have a question for either Michelle or Steve, and that is, do we have the authority to require that the back of the lot be cleaned up as part of the construction work to be done?
I think you guys have the ability to add something to that effect, since they're doing, I mean, it's a subdivision application. I'm not sure save if I'm missing something, but the ability to add that caveat to clean up the back of the lot, I think could be justified.
Okay. Do we, I don't recall on this one, do we have a draft resolution?
Yes, I can bring it up if you'd like.
Okay, would you please? Can you shoot that up, Michelle, just a bit? Thank you. Is there anything beyond 4? Okay. All right, can I have a motion either to approve or deny, please?
I'll make a motion to approve. Mike
Okay,
Mushak.
all right, Mike Mushak has moved, we approve. Is there a second?
I was going to move to approve as well, but I think we could add a couple of conditions to that if this isn't premature.
No, we can do it now, or we can do it after we have the motion, either way.
I
Go
would,
ahead. What is it you want to add?
Well, I would like to second it and just add that that the as was volunteered by the applicant, that the debris on the stone wall be cleaned up. And I think we could also add, as I believe it's in keeping with the tree regulations in Norwalk now, that, you know, any trees that do not need to be taken down for construction purposes and natural screening be left in the rear of the property.
Mike, is that acceptable to you?
You mean me?
Yes. Well, you made the motion, so.
Oh, right. Well, we don't have a tree ordinance as of this moment that I'm aware of. There's no.
I thought we did. I thought you needed to get a permit to take trees down these days.
No. Only if they're in the city right of way. And that's always been the case. I would be hesitant, as much as I would agree that's a great idea. I'd be hesitant to make that a condition on this when we haven't done that on any others. But I certainly agree with the sentiment. I mean, to be honest, I would love to see that as a shaded picnic area and a public park next to the tennis courts. But that ain't gonna happen. But it's such a nice spot to have a nice seating area next to the school. But I'm just throwing that out there as a totally off the cuff comment here. So the condition about the trees, I don't really think we can enforce, but I do think the condition for the cleaning up of the wall is something that is kind of generic enough to say yes. I mean, in essence, it could be called a zoning violation if somebody called it in, because that is by definition blight when you have a dumping area on a property. So based on our own definitions in city code, I think we can say all zoning violations have to be rectified, and that would include any dumping. Does that make sense?
All right, let's add that language. Richard, do you want to move forward with the requirement regarding the trees?
Well, if I didn't realize that there wasn't a tree ordinance, I thought there was. I must have misread that article in the newspaper a while back. But Steve, is there any prohibition against us making that as part of the resolution?
No, I don't think so, because I don't think you're restricting any specific trees. I think, if they come in with an application that shows for example, a completely denuded site, and they say, this is where we envision having our yard, we have a basketball court here or a pool, they're going to take those trees down anyway. So I think that falls within their rights to do so if they're going to demonstrate that's how they envision developing the lot in the future.
Okay. Then I would still like to request that we put it in, but I understand that the applicant's got a fair amount of leeway.
And Richard, just to add to that, I think I recall an article about the potential tree ordinance. And I think the language to that effect was in there, but it was a discussion or an article about discussion the Common Council was having about a tree ordinance. But I've been following the news. I don't remember seeing that anything was passed. I may be wrong, but I think that would be a pretty big thing that we could have all been aware of.
All right, so what we have is the motion as written with a requirement that the applicant clean up the area in the back of debris and fallen trees and whatever else is back there. We have a motion, we have a second. Let's go to a vote. Steve, let's call on the members.
Sure. Ms. Wells?
Yes.
Yes. Mr. Cantor?
Yes.
JJ?
Yes.
Mr. Rowena?
Yes.
Mr. Mushak?
Yes.
And I think just Mr. Shulman.
Yes. All right, the motion carries unanimously. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah. Let's move on to review and action on applications. 2022-15 CAM, Robert Gardella, 48 Calf Pasture Beach Road. Construct a one-story, 92 square foot plus or minus addition for kitchen expansion in existing restaurant, Captain's Galley.
Yeah, hi, I'm Rob Gardella. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, great. So I don't have a picture like the last one. That was great. But the location is, if you may be familiar with it, at the ship store, Captain's Galley at Norwalk Cove at that address. And it's we're looking to get double the grill space so we can keep up with the demand. And it's 92 square feet butting out from the wall, the south wall. And just to visualize it, since I don't have a drawing, it's about the width of a sidewalk, and then about the width of that little space there. So that's what.
Excuse me, Robert, this is Larry Cafaro, and I don't know if you knew I was on. Mr. Chairman, forgive the interruption. I represent Mr. Gardella and Gardella Brothers LLC and Paige Tregley, the applicant. And I'll be glad to jump in if need be, but I didn't know if Robert knew I was on the line.
Thank you, Attorney Cafaro.
Thanks, Larry. I knew you were on the way.
Okay. Yeah, if I may, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission, good evening. Larry Cafaro again, representing Gardella Brothers LLC. The property is located at Cove Marina. Many of you are probably familiar where that is. The actual address is 48 Calf Pasture Beach Road, which consists of this marina, which has 8 buildings on it. And what is referenced as Building 2 contains a small takeout restaurant and has for some time, although it's recently been revitalized. The takeout restaurant is currently approximately 350 square feet and has become extremely popular with boaters and non-boaters alike. Again, it's a takeout service with table service outside. And it has become so popular and a victim of its own success that it needs to expand. And what they're proposing is in this application before you is approximately, as Mr. Gardella indicated, a 92 square foot addition going out about 8 feet, and the width is 12 feet. The existing width is 12 feet, comprising approximately 92 square feet. And the reason for that is to give a bigger grill station and hood, a fryolator, move the sink prep area and also the food prep area. And this will allow them to accommodate more customers in a more efficient way. And we have already put a CAM proposal that's been heard before the Harbor Management Committee and Commission and has been approved. And we're hoping for your approval and be glad to answer any questions. Fairly simple, fairly straightforward, and be glad to answer any questions.
Questions for Attorney Cafaro?
Yes, I have a question. Larry, do you have a drawing?
We do have a drawing, and it was, I believe, submitted, unfortunately, and this is partly my fault. My technological abilities are not that great in this Zoom world, but I thought, and some of this P&Z staff might, is there a zone? I know there's a drawing on file with the application. I don't know if it's available to be brought up by the P&Z staff. If not, be glad to obviously provide it.
What would you guys like to see? The architectural plan or just like an aerial?
Why don't we start with that aerial, Michelle?
That probably would be enough. Yeah.
If I may, as you're waiting for that comment, the area to be expanded is over an existing parking space. It goes away from the water and, on an existing parking space.
Right here, correct?
Yes. So that comes out from the existing building, as you can see, comes out 8 feet and has a 12-foot width, again, approximately 92 square feet, that would accommodate and actually move the grill, the new grill, the larger grill back, as well as the fryolator, and also reposition the sink and allow for a larger food preparation area. There has been it is not considered a substantial improvement to the property, and it has no adverse impact to the coastal area, as we've been told.
Comments from commission members?
I have a comment, Mike Mushak here. I know how successful that restaurant is. I'm down there a lot in the summer, and congratulations. That's a great thing that you did there.
Thank you.
I thought there was a typo in the application because I thought 92 square feet. That can't be possible that someone's going to make it, have to go through all this trouble for that, but why not make it 920? Just add a zero. I don't want to embarrass the attorney Cafaro, but I think he might remember the name. There was a restaurant there that seated like 500 people way back when. I don't remember it. I didn't live in Norwalk then, but I know that it's historically referenced a lot. Whatever it was called, the Cove Marina restaurant.
Skipper's
Yeah,
Restaurant.
Commissioner Musak, I am far too young to remember.
Oh, of course.
Such a
I misspoke.
Attorney Cafaro, it doesn't help your argument to lie.
Anyway, that's all. There's, no issues here. I don't see anything.
Hi, I'm Paige. I would just like to chime in a little bit. So I run and operate the galley and am the one applying for this application just due to the success. And the main objective is to just be able to produce more food in a more timely manner, expand hours, and eventually get into catering, the off season, and really just improve the efficiency of the entire business because as I'm sure you know, it's so small that we're working in a very tight area. And it would help increase, the staff that we're able to have at one time and just produce a lot more food and just, make sure customer satisfaction is there. So with the addition of this, right now we're working with a 24-inch grill and a 10-pound fry later. So with this, we're definitely going to double the size of the grill, double the size of the fry later, larger sink prep area, and really just improve the overall efficiency of the restaurant and keep customers coming and keeping them happy. So,
Michelle, can you pull up the draft resolution on this, please? I happily ate at Skipper's many times since large organizations often held their meetings there.
What happened to it? Was it
It
the
went the
hurricane?
way of many, it went the
Yeah.
way of many things, Commissioner.
Yeah, it went the way of many things. It kind of started to collapse a little bit. It wasn't, it didn't age very well, I think. The
It was
structure.
the hurricane of 38. That's the one Larry Cafaro remembers.
88, not 38, right there, Michael.
I do have
Can I
a
have
question,
a motion to approve or disapprove?
but I have a question,
Sure,
Chairman.
go ahead.
Yes, I'd like to address Paige. Paige, with the expansion of the kitchen, are you also going to expand outdoor seating?
we definitely have the ability to expand the outdoor seating further into the parking lot. We did already previously expand from the first season into the second season. Fortunately, we have access to the marina's property where there's seating, like additional seating by the ship store. So we have the ability to, include more tables and chairs there. And, due to COVID, there was restrictions on the seating and the space. But, every year we're working on getting more seating and additional high tops, and we did the bar this year. So it's growing each year. So it definitely is an option. And I think that it's,
With the outdoor seating being in the parking lot and being so close to the water, will it be enclosed?
yes, we actually enclose it with we use, well, did you mean like an overhead? We haven't gotten there just yet. Right now, we just use umbrellas. There has been discussion of using awnings and, getting some coverage. But the one thing that we are trying to avoid is getting a permanent, awning or what's the word? Like a pergola, because we don't want to block the sun. And, a lot of people come there just to sit and soak up the sun. But there is the breezeway that, customers are allowed to go and sit under there if they wanted, a shaded enclosed area. So there never will be indoor seating, unfortunately, just because of the size of what we're working with. But for now.
Thank you, Paige.
Any other questions before we move on to a vote? Okay, again, can I have a motion to either approve or disapprove?
Motion to approve.
Okay, what I heard was Richard approve and Mike seconded. I think we can do this one by show of hands. Are there any comments on the motion to approve? All right, if not, let's go to a vote. All those in favor, just raise your hand. Galen, we can't see you.
I don't think she can hear you.
Yeah, can you raise your hand if you approve? Okay, it's unanimous. The request is approved.
Thank you so
all
much.
very much.
Larry, we miss your sense of humor at the benefits. Maybe we'll get back to normal someday, but
We'll be back. We'll be back. Thank you all so much. Appreciate
Thank
your.
you. We'll see you
Thank you.
soon.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
All right. I think this is where I want to move those two items, D and E, up because I think the merit station discussion is going to take us some time, and these should be brief. The first one is 18-03 SP 137-141 Connecticut Avenue bond release for motor vehicle storage facility. Staff want to just give us a brief explanation of that?
Yeah, both of these, what it looks like is, and I think they were from the same bank that was holding the bonds. I think they were doing some house cleaning and found some, a bunch of old bonds, and then tracked down who the bonds were for and contacted them. So, they were both pretty old. So I think we, staff went and verified all the conditions of the initial permit were met, so there are no outstanding items. So we would recommend release of both of these.
All right, so the first one is the bond release on 137-141 Connecticut Avenue. And I have a motion to approve.
Yep, motion.
Okay, Mike moves. Is there a second?
Second.
JJ and Galen both. Again, I think we can do this with a show of hands. All those in favor? Aye. All right, it's unanimous. And the second 5-01 SPR 327 Main Avenue bond release for the CVS, which has now been there for perhaps 10 years. Steve, you want to refer specifically to that one?
Sure, very similar circumstances. I think they were both around the same time frame where the conditions from the bond were met. Staff sees no reason to further hold the bond.
Okay. Motion to approve. Release of the bond. JJ makes the motion. Second.
Second.
Richard seconds. Again, raise of hands. All those in favor. Again, it's unanimous. Okay. Now let's move on to 2022-05 R/M/SP Merit Station Norwalk LLC 6769 7987 111 117 129 135 155 156 and 201 Glover Avenue and 2 Oakwood Avenue. North 7 zone map amendment to change zones from AAA residence and business number 2 to executive office development park, and to permit the new use in the executive office zone by special permit in conjunction with a special permit application for an executive office development park containing 1,303 dwelling units and approximately 28,000 square feet of retail within 7 buildings ranging from 5 to 15 stories, continued review and possible action. With that, we'll turn it over to Attorney Waters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, David Waters, General Counsel at Building and Land Technology, representing the applicant. Also with me here this evening, who has my name as well on the screen, is Chris Boxdale from Spiegel's Architects. So Chris missed his invitation, so I had forwarded mine so that he could join as well. Mr. Chairman, I think that there's a couple of things that we're hoping to accomplish tonight. I know that from hearing from your staff that there was a question about the height of the buildings at the very northern end of things. So we're happy to go back through that. We had provided you with some perspectives previously, and happy to walk you through those again. The second thing is that we have in fact been in touch with your staff and your consultant with regard to the design standards. Mr. Griswoch has prepared a set of design standards. We've made comments to those. We aren't at 100% complete agreement at this point, but we're very close. And so we're happy to work our way through those as well. And the third topic is the question again of the configuration of buildings 2.2, 2.3, and the Raccoon Park, for lack of a better name. So with that, if I am correct that you would like us to work our way through the height of the buildings at the north end of things, I can certainly start with that, if you don't mind.
Why don't we do that? And also just to alert you, I don't know how the other commission members feel, but I also have some questions that I'd like to discuss with you as well, and with the commissioners. So please, let's get started.
Let's see. So again, this is the overall plan as it currently is proposed. We have the buildings up here that are at the northern end of things. That's the buildings 3.1 and 3.2. They're proposed to be 15 stories. We had provided you, and they're part of the record, with an analysis of some perspectives of the buildings and what you could be able to see from various different locations. And this is kind of the overall plan. It shows you that there are where the various perspectives are shown from. You'll note that there are none from over on Main Avenue in this location. The reason for that is because you can't see through between the Merit 7 buildings to actually see these buildings. And so other than just in a brief glimpse, you wouldn't be able to see them. And again, looking at it from a map view, you can see where those various views are coming from. This shows you from the Route 7 expressway headed southbound, what you would see if you looked over to your left. This is building 3.2. This is building 3.1. One of the things that you'll notice is that there's a kind of an orange dotted line that runs along these buildings. We asked the people that prepared the perspectives to show us what is permitted currently as of right, which would be an 11-story building, and then to show the full proposed building. So what you see here is the 15 stories, but if it was just the 11 stories that would be under a commercial PRD, you'd be at this height instead.
Attorney Waters, even that building is not visible from Route 7?
No, it is, Mr. Chairman. That's what this shows, is that if you were driving down.
No, I'm sorry. I meant the Route 7 on the Merit 7 side.
The Main Avenue side, yes.
Yes.
Just a second.
I'm sorry. I still refer to it as Route 7.
Right.
My apologies.
Understood. This is the expressway side. This is what you would see from basically the intersection at Grist Mill. So this is what you see here on the far left is the northern end of Glover Avenue. And what you see along here is actually grist mill. And you can see the top again of the building. You can see what the 11 stories would be, and you can see what the 15 stories would be from there. From going back, from this angle here, you would not see anything. From this angle, you would not see anything because of the way that it is done. Now we will go to view number 5. And again, what you see here is two things. So this line right here is, and cutting across here, and then over here is the existing curb, Gristmill Village. So this is building C of the curb. What you see back here, that is the top of building 3.2. And you can see again, the dotted orange line, which would be the 11 stories, and then the upper part, which would be 15. So that's what you will see from Merritt, from Main Avenue after it is no longer Route 7.
Is there some assurance that those trees will remain going forward? Because it seems to be the trees that are blocking the view.
Well, I mean, the trees are blocking the view, although they don't do such a good job blocking them during the winter. But I will say that they're not on our property. We don't control them. That what you're seeing where those trees are is part of the Merritt 7 property, and it's part of the Norwalk River area. It's not part of our property at all.
Well, I understand that. I hate to keep asking and asking for more. Is it possible to show a view without those trees there? Because as you say, you don't control those trees. They happen to be there now, but there's no assurance they'll be there in the future.
I guess my question is why? I mean, are we trying to hide buildings?
Well, I'm a little bit concerned about the 15-story buildings.
I'm a little concerned that you're concerned about it since we've been talking about it for 2 years.
And I've expressed concern over that entire period of time about the height of those buildings. You know, the other commission members may or may not be concerned with that, but I have been.
I'm, as I say, I'm a bit disappointed that we're having this conversation, 2 years into this, but I don't know. This was done by an entity that did some modeling. It was based upon the pictures and areas that were available at the time. I don't know that I can get you one that was taken in during the winter.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, let's keep moving forward.
What I will say, though, is that again, if you look at where those buildings are to be located, which is right here, in the scheme of things, there's nothing around them. So it's that, yes, they may be visible from various locations, but it's not that they are going to have a negative impact upon anybody else in the way of either casting shade or anything of where there's a specific impact upon views. There's just nothing around them. So that I think addresses, at least we've discussed that particular question. I think perhaps the next topic is the design guidelines and design standards. And I think that it might be better to turn it over at this point to your consultant so that they can walk through, and we can, along the way, we'll point out where there are items of discussion that we're still having.
Bob, I think it's over to you.
It's over to me. I don't know, Steve, if you have the guidelines and can bring them up. I was, since I knew that they were in flux, I was not prepared to discuss them in great detail here, but if we have them, we could go through and at least, have they been, Mr. Chairman, have they been shared with the commission at all?
Yes, they have.
Okay. All
Everyone,
right, so
everyone on the commission should have a set.
okay, so that's a good start.
Why don't you start and I will dig them out of one of my files and pull it up. Just a
Do it
second.
from memory. Okay. All right. The guidelines are, first of all, they're organized generally into the guidelines proper, and then an appendix of examples of buildings that illustrate certain principles and ideas that are incorporated into the guidelines. And then there's a second appendix that will include the site development that is basically curb to building development ideas that the applicant has. But I think they submitted them today, but I haven't had a chance to look at anything they did today. So, and it just in general, what the process was first to look at the guidelines that Norwalk has for its urban renewal areas that we've worked under for the last X number of years, just to see what topics are covered. This is a unique area. It's not doesn't have a historic context, so it's a little bit different, but at least most of the topics are things that are appropriate. There we go. Appropriate to cover in guidelines. And then take out anything that was related to historic, but on the other hand, try to quantify as many of the concepts as possible. That being useful because, as I think all of us have realized, as you go through reviewing projects, it's very easy to say, well, it meets the standard because your intent was to, or it doesn't meet the standard. And you know, the more standards you can quantify, the better off you're going to be. Steve, why don't we go to the, let's see, design standards. Okay, let's just go scroll through. Okay, so some of the, so you'll see these same concepts that you have in your existing guidelines for other areas. Building orientation. One thing that we've done here is I like bullet points. I like outlines. I like things that you can point to. Yes, specifically this item. So you'll have about 6, 8 different basic topics with points within them. And then we will have illustrations, and as many illustrations as we could fit, and what concepts are exemplified by those illustrations. All of the illustrations here come from that appendix, and with each of the buildings in the appendix, we then go back and say, okay, these are each of the concepts that those buildings illustrate. So for example, you have an illustration here of a big open street front, and the thought being that an active pedestrian area wants to be big and open. We could go through each of these, but that's the basic idea. And oriented to the, I'm sorry, this is the oriented to the street, that you can tell where the building entrance is. That I can't remember if this one has the corner, but I guess the building massing has the corner. Building massing, the second point, one of the big things we focus in on here, and Mr. Chairman, this will be an interesting discussion for the commission, is the thought that if these buildings have in some way a reduced floor plate as they get a little bit higher, not a step back like you would see in like you would see in South Norwalk, not step back at one height and then step uniformly in, but just manipulate the volume that you have of the building such that things happen. This building happens to be a rather vigorous example of that, but we have a lot of different examples in the appendix. But the thought being, how do you take what's probably going to be a very modern building from everything we can tell from the applicant's application so far, and still get some of that feeling of a historic building that is interesting as it gets up high. And this is one way of doing it. And you'll see, you go through, we quantified it in terms of you come to a certain floor and you want the floor plate in some way reduced a certain amount at one level and then reduced a little more at a level higher than that. And for those that get high enough, a little more at a level higher than that. Now, what's that going to do? What would that do to the size of the building? The important thing we're saying is we don't want the number of units for the applicant to change. That's what they're basing their financing on. That's important. So there are two ways that they could accommodate those reductions, which aren't much. They're probably a total of 10% of the building area. You either make the footprint a little bit larger, longer, which on most of the buildings you could do, or you might have to go a story higher. And I know, Mr. Chairman, you have expressed concern about taller buildings. I would suggest on behalf of the applicant that perhaps a taller building, if it's interesting enough, is worth doing, that it's not a negative, but a positive. That's obviously for the commission to decide. So that's the second thing. Roof lines is the third item as we go down. And again, that's something that is in the historical district guidelines. It's a little different here, but it's still worth saying that doing interesting things as you get towards the sky is important. And we start talking about introducing what is in many zoning ordinances. I believe it's in Norwalk's, that pinnacles, spires, all those sort of decorative elements that we all like in historic buildings. There's no reason you can't do that in a modern building, and that should be not counted against the height of a building as long as it's within a very finite amount of the footprint. Talking about the building facades, a couple of things there. Occasionally, we've had, I believe on 10 Monroe, we had the question of what do you do with the blank facade? Well, this example, for example, is a blank facade on a building that has a monumental clock on it. Or you could do a monumental sculpture or a monumental whatever. You do something, even if it's a blank facade, make a building interesting. We talk here about ground floor, talk about window area as a percentage of the facade, something we haven't had in Norwalk explicitly, but if you look at successful elevations like 10 Monroe, these are about the percentages that you see on something like that. So just to say, a building that has more larger windows or larger window area tends to be more appealing. Building materials, we've talked about this on a number of projects, especially as you come down to the ground. You want durable materials, you want richness, you want some articulation of the architecture. It's not just a flat plane. One of the commissioners that talked before about pushing windows back. Well, that you do on a historic building, you might not do it on a modern building, but you would certainly do something like make this, you'll see a lot of these examples have a very sculptural feel to it. And finally, sustainable architecture. I think it was Commissioner Cantor that's spoken repeatedly. I hope I remember correctly. One of the commissioners has every project wants to know, what are we doing sustainable? So we've actually put a couple of quantifiables here. Amount of roof area that's dedicated to something active, green, or solar panels, and then a minimum roof area dedicated to solar panels. Just so that it's not like we might do it sometime. No, we're doing it now. At least that's the suggestion. Then the last section is site design, which is what the applicant is working on, or perhaps has worked on, lighting standards. And that's the end of that. And then you go to the appendix, and Steve, maybe you just scroll through real quickly. You see Steve and his professional contacts came up with these wonderful examples. And so our challenge was to say, within these wonderful examples, what principles are we seeing? Oh, hold on to that one for a second, Steve. Drop back down. Just so the difference between wedding cake step back, where everything goes back kind of in layers, and what we're talking about here is maybe you carve out a corner, maybe you carve out another corner, maybe some parts go up straight. You can do a lot of different things and get the interest in a modern building that you've gotten in traditional buildings. Thank you, Steve. He's finished scrolling through. So you can see a lot of different things, and perhaps you already have reactions to these, or perhaps you want to discuss them. But I think we've come up with some things that are appropriate for this site and perhaps innovative. I hope so. Hopefully appropriate for Norwalk.
It's the last appendix I noticed is still being worked on. Is that where you'd expect like pedestrian streetscape elements to be included?
That would be right, yes.
Okay, cool. I thought this was really awesome, this plan relative to the other pieces, and it really told the story in a way that it's coming to life in a really exciting way for me, at least. So thank you for all the work into this. I know this has been a lot from everyone.
I reviewed this very carefully, liked it, had the same concerns that you did. You don't want to disadvantage the developer with some of these setbacks. And given the size of them, it seems there is a fairly straightforward solution to that. And I think looking at the examples you've given, this could be a very handsome development. I think thinking about some of the other developments we've seen along West Avenue, for example, I think they're completely uninspired. And these go a long way toward making, it seems to me, a very positive statement for both the owner and for the city.
Mr. Chairman, as I said, we've gone through this with your staff and consultant. We're not in 100% agreement on everything. With some of the numbers, for example, percentages and what have you, and we're still in discussion on that. There are a couple of topics that where we do feel that there's alternatives that may be. So for example, on the stepping back of buildings, we had talked with your consultants about other ways of doing that, other architectural features that would give texture to a building so that it's not just a flat building, but that would not necessarily mean the kind of stepping back that is being proposed here. And part of the reason for that is because a couple of the buildings, especially down at the southern end of the site, are very long and narrow. So it's very difficult to accomplish the kind of setting back with the percentages that are being proposed and still be able to maintain the building integrity itself. So we're in the process of providing some architectural concepts as to how differentiation and articulation of the building could be accomplished through design. And that would be possibly another alternative to stepping the buildings back. So that's one discussion point that we're still working through with your staff and consultant.
Dave, can I interrupt for just a second? This is actually a comment for Steve and Bob. The one thing I did note in going through this, as much as I liked it, was that all of the buildings you were showing were rather tall buildings. This probably to David's point. I would like you to take a look not only at what BLT comes back with, but to see if you can find examples of what you've proposed in your appendix for buildings with less height and more spread.
There are, Mr. Chairman, there are a couple buildings in there that aren't as tall. So I think the pages 14 and 15 have buildings with some different massing, different ways to hide the massing and break it up a little bit. So they are in there. So, and then I think Bob and I differed a little bit on this, but I think, even a couple of the buildings with the flatter facade that was continuous up, that there's ways to do, to get the final design that's still very attractive and interesting. So I think there's language to be added that's not a heavy lift on anyone's part to try to, just give a little bit of flexibility. So, let the architect do their thing and come up with the best design possible.
I just want to say that I really don't understand the objection to the height. Where this complex is situated, as Attorney Waters pointed out, there's no disadvantage to the height. It isn't casting a shadow on anything. It isn't looming over any other, buildings. I think if we're going to have tall buildings anywhere in Norwalk, this is a good, reasonable place for them. That's just my opinion.
Completely agree with Galen on that point.
I would agree with Galen as well, but there's another kind of threshold question that I wanted to ask, and when we first started listening to this, it was with the idea that we were looking at creating a separate district, so to speak, for this development, and that we were looking to approve the concept of this development, and then individual blocks of it were going to be approved, were going to be applied for and approved as construction was going to be done. I guess I'm trying to understand why we are still, kind of walking around in the minutia and not like discussing the grand scheme of it, whether we think it's a good idea or not. I personally have learned over the years that I have no taste whatsoever in art or design. And I'm astounded when I see what our consultant, Bob, comes up with is amazing to me. And he seems to not bring out the ego in other architects and is able to work with them very well. So I'm just kind of wondering, why we can't push forward with the general aspect of it and then let the applicant come in with the specifics that we're going to approve, because I know myself, I'm going to age out, I think, before it gets to phase 2, probably past phase 1. So, we should probably get rolling.
Richard,
yes.
Once we approve these concepts, we have very little control over what goes up. So we need to make decisions now on what we require.
Well, I didn't see that as how this was going. The concept was, number of units, buildings, streetscapes, and that kind of stuff. But the individual buildings themselves, as they went along, unless I'm wrong in thinking this, we're going to be coming in blocks and then approved or not. But that's
Steve,
my comment.
correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we have very little control once we approve the guidelines.
Well, then I totally misunderstood what the concept of this was, because I thought that it was breaking up a gigantic project into a number of smaller ones that would be under our control. It was almost like filing an application for a special permit for each area that was coming in. It sounded like to me, and I thought it was a great idea because this is a huge project.
The applicant does not want to go through a special permit process.
I was just using
for each of the buildings.
They're coming in for each piece in conformance with the overall plan that we've talked about.
Right.
I think you're both right, in a sense that the idea is to phase the project and approve the individual applications for the various buildings that they come in at whatever stage they come in. But I think that the reason we're having this kind of exercise about the design concept is, unlike other areas of the city, you don't have design standards to point to. So in South Norwalk, there's an established set of guidelines that, whatever project comes in has to meet those standards. So this one, we're kind of putting those standards in now. So that way, when the buildings come in, we get a sense of the expectations are set and that you know what you want. And that way, when the projects come in, you can say, okay, here's the general guidelines that were established and approved as part of this application. And then just look at it from that perspective, which hopefully, otherwise you'd be doing a lot of haggling without a lot of ability to haggle on your end.
Yeah, Mr. Rowena, I think that I agree with you that the concept that we have presented was that we want to be able to look at the big picture and be able to we must come back with individual buildings that will be done under site plan review, which is the same way that all of the Merit 7 buildings was done by site plan review. So, I mean, there is a process that would then still have to occur after that. I think that what is being hoped for in getting into some of these design details is that there would be less that would be subject to variable at the time that each of these individual applications come in. The good news on that is that, if we front load these design guidelines, it means that the heavy lifting is done, and where often you would then have significant discussion about what does the building look like, what does the front site setback look like, all the rest of that, it's already there. So that the individual applications that would be done, actually you do have a fairly streamlined process. They either meet the guidelines or they don't. And if they don't, then it's a basis for rejection. And if they do, then it should be exactly what you're asking for and should be approved. So it's, it's kind of, as Steve said, I think it's kind of a combination of the two. We're trying to do a big picture so that we all understand and what we're going to get eventually. But we are getting to some minutia at this point. And the fine line really is between trying to get to minutia when we haven't designed the building. So it's hard to actually define some of the things until you actually see what it's going to look like. But by the same
maybe that
token,
was a bad adjective that I used, but I was just thinking about one of the examples that you gave was if you had somebody that was willing to, if you were going to build a hotel and then somebody else came in and wanted to take over 250,000 square feet, that you would be able to change gears, so to speak, without starting the process all over again. So maybe minutia was a bad word. I shouldn't have said that, but
no, it's a fair comment. But I do think that the guidelines that have been generated and that we're still working on would be sufficient and would be adequate to address changes as well. Whether it's, if you think about Canterbury Green in Stamford, which is an office building, but it was modeled after the church that it sits right beside. So there are ways to have office buildings or hotels or whatever that actually would still be consistent with the types of guidelines we're talking about here. The trick is to make sure that the guidelines are sufficiently specific that you can understand what they are intended to accomplish, but still flexible enough to make sure that whether a use changes or whether the site changes or design is required, that it can be done and accomplished in accordance with those guidelines.
Okay.
I do think, the other thing that we're still working on is we had provided some additional pictures and documentation specifically to the question of the streetscape. We have also submitted to be included within the guidelines the sections that were used for the improvements at the north end of Glover Avenue. So it shows, the bike lanes, the parking areas, the granite curbing, the amenity shelf, the sidewalks, things like that. So the road itself, as well as the treatment of the front areas between the building front and the sidewalk, is all part of what we have now submitted as part of our suggested piece of these guidelines, and that obviously is still under review since they just got it by your staff and consultant. But I think that a lot of the pictures that we used were the same ones that we provided when we met with you and talked about the guidelines before. So they're not a surprise. They're the things that we think you all had thought were an acceptable treatment of that area in the fronts of buildings. So that kind of, I think, yes, there are, as I said, there are still some tweaks that are being done. There's still some agreements that we have to reach, but we're very close to being wrapped up, I think, with all of this as far as the design guidelines are concerned.
Steve, there was a note in one of your emails about the size or the positioning of Raccoon Park. Has there been agreement on that? Or
Yeah,
is that still open? Okay.
What a nice segue. And that is the third aspect to all of this for tonight, as far as our topics were concerned. I know that there had been some discussion and some request by the commission and its consultants and staff for us to increase the size of Raccoon Park. We are not willing to do that. We feel that our design, as it is currently proposed, actually provides the appropriate sized park area. It also increases significantly beyond that area because of the fact that there is a new trail that will be added. And if I can go back to where we were.
Dave, while you're doing that, I just want to mention that Commissioner Langalis has joined us.
Yeah. So this area right here is, as we have proposed it, is about 2 acres. And to give you some perspective that you may be able to see from a tangible standpoint, that's about half the size of the Great Lawn at Cranberry Park. But in addition to this area, you now have, we're creating, because we can do it on DOT property, a further walk, a trail that will actually go to the top of Oakwood. So the area of the park is actually significant, and it's about 15% of the entire property that is the master plan. I don't know of anybody any other applicant that I can think of in all the years that I've been practicing where they've donated public land of that significance within a development. We also feel that, and this is a subject of dispute, I understand, but we also feel that pulling this building back significantly further just creates this gap that makes buildings 3.1 and 3.2 much less of the community. That in fact, this is a right-sized area as an open space, as a public open space, but that to make it larger means that buildings 3.1 and 3.2 truly are an island unto themselves. And so that becomes another part of it. And the third part is, from our perspective, that if we were to commit to reducing the footprint to the north on building 2.3 by reorienting it or whatever, and there's a whole number of arguments as to whether that's possible and how that would work, and whether it can be done in a phased way, which is necessary for construction. But beyond that, what we are really concerned about is that we will end up putting in such a restriction that it will really foreclose any design flexibility that we would have in designing that building. That it would force us into a single monolithic building that we don't know is actually what is called for there. And so we're not willing to, at this point, to modify the concept and location of what we have currently proposed. That said, obviously, we're going to make the park as large as we can within that area, as long as it makes an appropriate design. So it may be that it won't be quite to the far north as it is right now. It may actually be something less than that. We may be, work our way through and come back to where it has been suggested that we should go with turning that second building 90 degrees. But we're not willing to do that at this point because, again, we haven't designed it. We don't have a feel for what that would actually look like and how we would do it.
I think that was all the items that at least that I thought of that were kind of outstanding.
Yes,
for
Steve,
my
I
notes.
agree with you. I think that was the open items that I knew of that we wanted to make sure that we touched base on tonight.
Steve, I think there are two other items. We don't need to discuss them tonight. You can discuss them with the applicant. One is that very dangerous grist mill road, which doesn't allow for any connection to any safe connection to Main Avenue.
Lou, are you talking about
so
pedestrian?
now- What's that?
Are you talking pedestrian?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, got it.
We now have some idea of what it would cost to put in a safe walkway there. And I think you need to discuss with the applicant some way of getting that done, whether they convince the state to do it now, or whether they participate in the cost, or whether they do it themselves. I mean, it's a huge safety hole, not only for this development, but for their other existing development, which borders on Grist Mill Road. The other issue, again, at least for
On
me,
that one, Lou, what is the
Yep.
cost? You said we got the.
it looks like everything, including correcting the signals, the traffic signals, somewhere in the neighborhood of $350,000. The other.
I'm sorry to
issue
interrupt,
is-
Lou, but where did that number come from?
Came from the city, TMP.
Did the TMP indicate that they have funds to also contribute to that?
No, that just was just to get a sense of what the cost might be for the improvements.
Right.
It was just quick question to ask.
The second issue is I think there ought to be some reasonable time limit on what we're approving here. I don't mean something like 2 or 3 years, but maybe it's 10 years or 11 years, because at some point things may change, and they may change radically. And so it may be that the city thinks that the buildings that are there are fine, but that it's important to change zoning in some way. And yet the city would be hamstrung. It could be 20 years out and the city could be hamstrung. So it seems to me there ought to be some discussion about giving the developer a reasonable amount of time to complete the project, but also offering the city some protection through some limit on how long we offer them this opportunity.
I don't understand how the city is hamstrung. You know, the property is owned by BLT. If BLT can't develop it, they're going to want to sell it. And the owner of it is going to want to do something with that property and would have to come back to the city or develop it within the plan we approved today. So I don't understand how the city's being damaged.
Well, the developer may not change what they want to do. They may simply want to move this forward. But you know, the last piece or the last two pieces, maybe 15 or 18 or 20 years out, who the heck knows what things are going to look like then?
But how is that the city's issue? We don't own the property.
We don't own, well, we don't own any property basically that's developed in the city, but we still establish rules and regulations for how it's to be developed.
Right, and we will have
Establish the rules.
Right, and those rules go forward forever.
Yeah, but Lou, that would be like saying any piece of zoning that we have has a sunset clause attached to it across the entire regulation book. And we don't do that anywhere else. It'd be like saying we have to rewrite every piece of regulation after 20 years, right?
Well,
no,
that's not what I'm saying at all. I think you're misunderstanding me.
Okay.
I just don't get it. That's why I'm asking. I'm not challenging you. I just don't.
May I interject here?
Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
I think what Lou's trying to say is this going to preclude the city from rezoning indefinitely into the future? In other words, the city is allowed to rezone anything at any time. And is this going to be the one exception to what the city can rezone?
But that's not true either, because it's not true either, because once you have your approvals, whether it's for this size project or whether it's for a CAM single family house, it's vested interest. You can change the zoning all you want, but if somebody has their permit to build their single family house in a CAM zone, they can build it, whether the zoning's been changed or not. I will tell you that this is a non-starter for us, that for a number of reasons. One of them is that the whole purpose of going through a master plan was so that we would have assurances and the city would have assurances as to what was being built, and so that you couldn't pull the rug out from under us halfway through. If you think about Merit 7, it took, what, 15, 20 years for that to be built. Now, it actually was built almost exactly the way that it was originally planned, but it took a long time. And part of the problem that I am seriously concerned about is that, as we know, traffic is the big issue, and the improvements that need to be made for traffic are one of the things that will be a factor in how soon the rest of the project can be developed. We know the first phase can be done without any significant offsite improvements. We've agreed that there are two significant projects that need to be done, one for each of the other phases. One of them is contemplated to start in 2025. The other one is still on the books, and not yet in a timetable. It just isn't fair. That piece of it just isn't fair.
And traffic is one of the only cards we have to play on the site plan review relative to anything else. So I think I tend to fully agree with Galen and Attorney Waters on this one, that if traffic is not done, we can actually, we can say no to additional buildings under the site plan rules. If I'm saying that right, Steve, correct? That's one of the few criteria we have still left in our pocket, to the extent we need something in our pocket.
Yeah, and I think going way back, Attorney Waters and I discussed as part of the approval that there would be, that it's broken up into a southern section, a middle section, and a northern section. The southern section is, as Attorney Waters indicated, that the existing or the proposed southern phase traffic-wise matched up with what was existing in terms of the former and current uses on the west side. But then the middle section was going to be tied to the improvements on the off ramps and on ramps to Merit 7. And then the third phase was contingent upon the grist mill Glover interchange improvements and then whatever else happens on Main Ave as a result of that. So it's kind of like these improvements happen, then you can go on to the next phase of the project.
And DOT is very reliable on their timetables, right? You know, they hit their mile markers every time. So I'm sure this is going to
Yes.
be perfect.
We want, no, we were going to be very nice to DOT because we want DOT to expedite these improvements as quickly as possible.
We sure do.
Exactly.
May I make a comment? Mike Mushak
Mike.
here. Hi. I want to go back to the discussion on the open space just briefly. And I have an opinion about it in that the applicant is generously improving the North River Valley Trail connection under the grist mill bridge. And that linear parks are not something we're used to talking about in Norwalk, but I'm used to talking about them and using them in other parts of the country. We just certainly have trails in other parts of the state, like the Farmington Valley Trail. But the open space that the trail accesses is a valid amount of open space that should be included in this in terms of its accessibility to the residents. I don't think it all has to go into Raccoon Park. The 2 acres is about the size of Ryan Park. Of course, Ryan Park includes parking lot. So if you took out parking lot, hardscape, amphitheater, all that other stuff, but you can imagine the scale of it. It's a city, half a city block, I guess, if you're thinking about New York. But it's a sizable park. But the linear park portion, which is the North River Valley Trail, and which I'm glad the applicant is, participating in and realizing the potential of, is open space as well. And so I don't really have any issue with the Raccoon Park size. And I do think we could end up suburbanizing this to a point with too much open space in between. And I'm a landscape architect and I'm all for open space. But it's a matter of how, it's more a matter of quality, not quantity. So I think the quality of open space here, and don't forget, it came up in the last discussion that we had about the design guidelines when they showed all of the little parklets, et cetera, along the streetscape. That is also open space in terms of how it's being presented. I don't think we all understood that at the time, but when we saw the photos of seating and trees and little parks along the street, those are all considered, also open space, even though it's, for New York City standards, let's say that's open space, but this is not New York City. I'm just saying in an urban environment, and this is a hybrid suburban and urban environment, the streetscape is going to be part of the open space. So I'm not worried at all about that. And the height of the buildings does not concern me at all. I was once at the top of the Diageo headquarters with views of the Sound. They had a bar up there that, they served alcohol at, I guess it was all their brands, but the views of that are going to be available the higher you go on these buildings is going to be tremendous and a selling point, obviously, for the owner. But it's an advantage of this spot. It's near the highest point in Norwalk. The impact on highways, view sheds, et cetera, is minimal. And if anything, I'd want to see a little bit more building. We have lots of open space, lots of trees, more trees than we've ever had in Connecticut. I like to see a little bit of architecture peeking up. Doesn't bother me at all. So,
Mike, would you go above the 15 stories?
No, I don't think so. I think I think in a context here, that's reasonable. And certainly, we're looking at all the buildings across the street, which, it depends on where you measure them from. The grade of the actual main avenue is way down below. And so you can't say that's a 8-story building when you actually stand and you are in a car on Main Avenue and you look at it that is a relatively much taller building, right? So none of those scare me. I think if anything, it's, I like the word, I don't want to use the overused word iconic, but in this case, making some iconic buildings would be, to me, part of the appeal of this spot and give it a more of a sense of place. So none of that scares me. Size of buildings, and I think we can hold a lot of control over site plan review, which is what we would have in the future. And I'm sort of comfortable with where we are on this. I'm not, the pedestrian connection on Grist Mill is something that, yeah, you know, it'd be great if the applicant came forward and said, hey, we'll do that for you. Just throwing that out there. But otherwise.
May I ask a question, just to probe a little bit? Would you be willing to trade off a story of height for more interest at the top of a building?
Yes. You mean in terms of adding a story?
That's correct, right?
Yeah.
In other words, okay.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I think that, yeah, that would be, if that could add to a little more integrity in architecture. But, you know, I'm not afraid of monolithic buildings either. Some of them, you know, it depends on the skin and everything else.
We've seen a lot of housing, not to editorialize too much, but in our daily news of the Ukraine, we've seen a lot of socialist housing that is pretty much slabs going up 10 to 15 stories. And I guess I'm hoping we can find a way to structure this so that it's a little more interesting.
Well, I'm not going to disagree with that. And it's an interesting perspective. Anyway, I just want to say that I'm almost good to go with where we are on this. It seems well thought out.
So I don't have any opposition about the, you know, the landmark style of the building being seen from, you know, the Route 7 super connector. I think that, you know, will kind of like break up some of the scenery. So I don't have an opposition about that. I do have an opposition about the proposed traffic. And so I have heard, you know, the viewpoints on, you know, opening up some lanes in order to allow for more traffic of these new cars in the area. If you're talking about a 15-story building, then you're talking about 15 stories worth of new residents and 15 stories worth of new cars. And I'm just wanted to make sure to piggyback on the concerns of the other commissioners, if there is enough roadway and access way to allow for these new vehicles in that particular area.
So Commissioner, I mean, just to respond, we understand that. And whether it's part of this application or whether it's part of each of the individual applications that come next, we do need to demonstrate that in order to actually build these buildings, that we comply with your regulations on stable traffic flow. And that inevitably requires improvements that have to be made. What we have submitted to you is an analysis that shows that that phase 1, which is the southern 3 buildings, 1.1, 1.2, and 2.1, that the traffic that would be generated by those buildings can be, with some minor adjustments to striping and timing of lights, can be accommodated at this point. And so the concept has been that those would be phase 1. We could move forward with that the other 2 phases, which would be, you know, 2.2, 2.3 as 1 and 3.1, 3.2 as 2, that those we know are going to require significant improvements. And we've already been to OSTA, and they are aware of it. And they have also signed off at this point on a preliminary basis with our initial analysis as to phase 1. So we understand, and we completely get it that, traffic is an issue. And in order to complete this project, we're going to have some significant improvements that need to be made. But we also believe, and OSTA believes, that the first phase we should be able to do and will be allowed to do without significant changes in what exists out there right now, because it will have not a significant impact.
Thank you, David.
I'd like to add something to that conversation. Just to refresh everyone's memory, the 715, the Merritt Parkway and Route 7 interchange is moving forward slowly, but
moving.
Yeah, well, very slowly. Yes, we go way back on that one.
Yes, we do.
But it is, it is, they have regular meetings and updates. I'm getting the emails, and a decision will be made, I believe, on the preferred alternative this month. And then public hearings will happen this summer. But in any case, there's a significant improvement there. And then eventually, just again to refresh everybody's memory, is that the state had discussed making a four-way intersection by diverting Glover up to, so the state property, I wish I had my arrow, so because that's how I talk, but that whole green space there under the between the two blue arrows on the right of this site plan, that's state property. And they would eventually, I believe, or at least it's been discussed, that they're going to possibly run Glover up to create a four-way intersection and eliminate the two intersections that are there now, and hopefully, improve efficiency. They can do it. They have the property there. When that happens, we don't know. But I just wanted to remind people that that major change has been discussed, or at least debated at the state level. Correct me if I'm wrong, if anybody's aware of any other information.
No, in fact, Commissioner, we were the ones that proposed the four-way intersection to get rid of two three-way intersections and eliminate one light as a result. And it is definitely the preferred improvement at this point. One of the things that needs to be done as part of that is to then make some additional improvements on Main Avenue headed north, so that the traffic, which now will be more free flowing through the Grist Mill Route 7 intersection, will now not get pushed up into being a more of a traffic issue as you get onto Main Avenue headed north on Route 7. So that's the piece that still needs to be kind of worked its way through in order to be able to get to that point.
And further improvements on 7 as you get down to Oak and Almond and Starbucks.
Yes, exactly.
And
That's
further up
what I
to
was
Hyde
referring.
Park. All of that is in the works as well. I don't know what they're going to do there, but that's been on the books.
Right, that's part of what I was just referring to, the around DMV and Oak and Almond and headed north towards the Walmart area and things like that. Yeah.
I think a rotary would be great in that area.
Actually, yes, I do too. Driving around Europe and you're like, you never have to sit at a traffic light. It's
exactly.
Really nice.
And this way you can access both sides of the road without having to wait for the light.
Yes.
Well, maybe you and I can team up and see what we can do.
All right, let's get back to our agenda.
Well, I would want to add one more thing, Lou, is that
Go ahead,
I would
Nick.
I would be open. I mean, as we're progressing here, of if the height is a thing to create more elements or whatnot, that there's some flexibility there. I would be open to seeing what Bob has on that. I know he mentioned it earlier as well, of like reducing the plate a little bit, increase the height, creates a fairness or an equity to both the developer, but also creates more architectural interest. I'm not afraid of going even a little higher than what we have here, but I may be solely in the minority on that one.
Okay, Attorney Waters, anything else?
No, Mr. Chairman, I think that, at this point, I'd like to think that with some
Debbie
massaging.
had a comment too.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Jackie. Yes, thank you, Lou. I just would like to say I'm a little surprised by Commissioner Mushak's sort of lack of concern over green space or trees when Norwalk has recently received like the worst tree canopy vote in the state for city our size. And when this project is complete with approximately 12 to 1,300 people living there, it's going to increase the population of Norwalk by like 1.4%, which is not insignificant. And I think that that's a lot of people in a sort of a densely populated area, and that we should do everything we can to make it not suburban, but a nice place to live, and having trees and having landscape and having Raccoon Park and sidewalks and walkable intersections on, one of the worst, end of the Merritt 7 Parkway roads. We should do everything we can to make it as human friendly as possible. And I would applaud the developer for making the buildings interesting. I think they should want to do that out of pride, not out of, of course, we want them to be prosperous, but they should be good looking buildings, and they don't need to be looming out of the skyline like Mohegan Sun or something where there's lots of trees around. They should fit in, I think, with the landscape and not be some behemoth where otherwise when you drove to the end of the connector, you see trees and now you're going to see buildings. So I would put my opinion that softening it rather than making it bigger and bolder would be a nice way for Norwalk, which is, yes, a city, but it's more like a town city. It's not a city. It's not New York City. We don't need, skyline skyscrapers. Thank you.
And just to defend my position for a moment, I certainly never suggested sacrificing trees for building, but I do, because I think the Norwalk River Valley Trail is lined with trees, and certainly trees are going to line the streets, and I'm all for trees, absolutely. And I am aware of that study. I will, however, just add that that study is referenced a lot, but unfortunately, they counted all of the land in Norwalk that's underwater, which we have more land underwater in the harbor and going out to the Norwalk Islands than any other city in Fairfield County and in Connecticut. And so since a third of our city is underwater, of course, when they count tree canopy, it looks like we have a very minimal amount of tree canopy, when in reality, they were accounting the overall size of the city. And in proportion, yes, a lot of our Norwalk Harbor has no tree canopy. Absolutely. It's underwater. It's eelgrass. But anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there because whenever I hear that study, I have been planting hundreds of trees around Norwalk for the 20 years I've lived here. I've planted all of Martin Luther King. I've planted 120 trees along that route. And when anybody accuses me of not caring for trees, I have to just put it on the record that my record speaks for itself. Thank you very much.
Okay. Let's move on. The next item is Steve's going to continue the conversation regarding zoning regulation and map amendments for the industrial use and zones.
Mr. Chairman, if I might back up a second, I think
yeah.
the only unresolved item related to that is kind of the moving this towards a public hearing. So I think that's kind of probably why Attorney Waters is still with us at 8:00.
Well,
whatever.
I think we want to do that. I think we need to be a little bit closer on the guidelines and more comfortable with them as a commission before we're ready to move this to public hearing. And we have yet, to see the revised guidelines regarding the streetscape. I think those things need to be resolved before we bring it before the public.
It seemed to me like we were in pretty good agreement today on most of the issues. But that's just what seemed to me.
Well, we're not really in full agreement yet on the architectural issues.
We seem to be coming to pretty much full agreement on it.
We're moving in that direction for sure, but I don't think we're there.
Can I
didn't
ask
hear Mr.
Attorney?
Waters say that what the staff and Bob Griswatz are suggesting is acceptable. He's saying we're moving forward, but that we're not there yet, and I agree.
One thing, and I haven't been able to get an answer to this because I can't find a record of it. I mean, as part of, since there's a map amendment and text amendment, we do have to refer this out. I think to Westcog and Wilton, and I got to check who else we need to refer to. And I don't know if we did that because it's been so long since this application came in. I've been checking old records and I've got to look just through paper copies now. I don't know if we actually ever started it because I don't know if we ever got to the phase where we thought we were ready. So if that hasn't happened yet, we would probably, and Dave and I can discuss this offline.
Sure.
If we haven't done that yet, we do have to refer it out, which is, probably starts a 35-day clock if I'm, without looking at the statute again. So I think we do have the ability to, in the interim, finish the design guidelines. I don't really think we're too far apart on, there's probably going to be a few things that we may not agree on, which is fine. And then the commission can discuss that at a public hearing, and you're not under, once you open the hearing, you don't have to close it.
Yeah.
Right.
So you do have a little more
Steve,
time.
I don't have any objection to you referring this out and getting that moving forward.
Okay, we can, Dave, do you recall if that happened? I don't recall at all.
I don't recall whether it did or not. There's something in the back of my mind that says that there was a referral to Westcog, but I don't know that that actually happened. I may have just thought that it did. So,
well, if it hasn't happened, let's make it happen.
Yeah, that part's easy if it hasn't happened. I just don't want to do it if we already did it. That's all.
Agreed.
Well, a call to Westcog will get you the answer to that.
Well, maybe.
Mr. Chairman, if I may make a suggestion, I'm looking at your calendars. I know that I am not available at your second meeting in May, which is the 18th. Knowing that there's a 35-day, assuming that we have to do the referrals, that there's a 35-day period before to allow for those referrals to go out and be responded to and what have you, means that we would not be able to make a hearing for May 5th. So what I'd like to suggest is that we target a public hearing for your first meeting in June, on June 2nd. And by that time, certainly we should be able to, it'll put the fire under our toes to get the guidelines done, to make sure that everything is sewn up. There have been a number of changes and modifications and massages that we've done to things like the text amendment, so we can make sure everything is completely clean and what have you. But frankly, I'd love to be able to say that, yes, at least we could have a pin in a date at this point.
I don't know how the other commission members feel, but I don't have any objection to that. Can I get a rough idea from the other commissioners?
I'm fine with it.
On board.
Me too.
Thank you. That would make us very happy.
Well, we're not in the business of making you happy.
Well, I mean, every once in a while, if we're around for 2 years doing this, every once in a while you're going to do it. So.
Not a problem. Okay, everybody seems to be in agreement on that.
Great, thank you. In that case, unless you have something else for me, I think that I know you've got other things that you need to deal with, and I'm happy to drop off now.
Okay, enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
All right, Steve.
Okay, can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, just blow it up a little bit. So figured I would just run through, there were some outstanding items that were just more like questions and clarifications that I wanted to address before we start the referral process out on this and then discuss that, what happens related to that. So I've had further conversations. Brian Terzian is a contractor in Norwalk, has a couple different properties in the city, and he's very concerned about some of the changes. And so I had some conversations with him, and a couple tweaks that I'm suggesting as a result of that conversation. I wanted to just go over those with you and some of the other things we're talking about. So the upper definition here of commercial vehicle storage yard, this was the one we've been working off of.
Steve, excuse me for interrupting, but did you send that memo in our packet of attachments? What one are you on?
No, you didn't see this, no.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Sure, yeah, and the idea, what I was going to do was, assuming there was agreement or whatever modifications came, I'll post all this to the website tomorrow or Monday. So we have it up there. And I'm happy to send it out as well. But the change that really is occurring or contemplated to occur here is if you have a commercial vehicle storage yard, you could also have bigger trucks. We basically, initially it was meant to, was targeted for smaller vehicles, but I don't have any objection. I don't think it causes any problems if you have larger equipment there. I think that the issue has always been the earth processing that occurs on the contractor yards when they're stirring up the piles and there's dust and all those kind of things. So this was one concept.
This was the very issue that I was going to ask you about. And you wanted me to email you.
Oh, okay, sure. Yeah, and I'm happy that might be a different subject, and I'm going to talk about how this ties into where it can happen in the different zones too, but just wanted to share with you the definition.
Thank you.
No problem. So like I said, the existing definition proposed to allow for, vehicles like you could have a propane delivery truck, an oil truck, contractor could be a plumber, an electrician could have his vehicles there, but it excluded dump trucks and other construction equipment. Just an idea, and I don't think it's unfair is to allow those larger pieces of equipment there, provided that still they can't do that earth processing there. So just wanted to
But what that does mean is those larger trucks will be driving through the area, could be driven through the area, and those larger trucks conceptually have more exhaust and fumes and et cetera of that nature, right?
Potentially. I mean, I think all those vehicles are under the same kind of emission standards, I would think, but I could find that out if that was a question you wanted me to look into.
I was just worried the health of the people, the equity for the community is the one
It
thing.
would be nice if we could regulate the pollution that dump trucks spew out as they drive around town, but I guess that's probably not within our domain, right?
Well, we can control what the usage of the land is. And
Absolutely.
that in line is the usage of where they are going. And that's sort of a lot of.
Yeah, thank you, Nick, because I agree. This is the time to speak up about it. And this is, Steve, after you make your presentation, I would like to comment on this particular issue. Absolutely.
Sure. I mean, if you want to do it now, then I can move on to other stuff after. Otherwise, we got to jump.
Okay. What I told you about, there is a business that is excavating right down the street from me. I live off of Bell Avenue, but I believe this street that's listed is called Hemlock Street, even though it's on Bell Avenue. And they are excavating, digging the entire ground because they're going to do a parking lot for the contract trucks, the delivery trucks and everything. And how many trucks will be on that property is not known to the community. We just caught wind of this.
Yeah, I'd have to look into that. I don't know.
And this is in a residential neighborhood. I mean, there is actually a school bus stop right across the street from there.
Okay. If you have a better idea on the actual street address, that would probably.
I do. Okay. So they annexed the property from 38 Hemlock Street. And like I said, it's very is deceiving because it's actually on Bell Avenue. So I don't know how this business has a, you know, the address on Hemlock Street, which is like a block up and then around the corner. But be that as it may, I live in this area, and as many neighbors do, and we did not know this was happening until the big trucks showed up.
Okay, yeah, I can have somebody easily go out and check that and see if that's a permitted activity or what's it related to. I'm not familiar with it, so I couldn't answer the question.
Thank you.
Sure. And I think the only other change to the definitions was, and I'm going to talk about it in another section, was in the industrial zones plan, they talked about how to regulate the height of these buildings when they're, you know, when you're in an area where it's abutting residential zones. And there was the concept of the transitional height plane. And I had posed a question to the consultant because I did doing more research on it. There was a couple different ways that I've seen other communities regulate that. And I bounced the idea back off them, and they started playing with the numbers a little bit. And they said, it might be better to regulate it similarly to how you regulate upper story setbacks now in other zones. So I've got a proposed change that I'll show you a little later on, which I think accomplishes the very same thing, but it's just easier for us to administer and enforce. All right, so I'm going to just.
Is that, Steve, is that similar to what we just passed in the East Norwalk TOD? Remember we had the 45-degree angle. It's just a graphic that I recall.
I don't know
When
if
it was
we
up
put that in.
against, when it was up against a zone, a different zone.
I don't think I think it's more similar to what would be regulated in South Norwalk versus versus other spots. All right, so I'm going to switch as soon as I find it. Just give me 1 sec. Okay, I'll start at the top, and this is, I'm just going to go down by the 3 zones that are affected, and this is the proposed changes to the industrial 1 zone. And we had a question. I don't think we talked about it, but I don't think we came up with a resolution on that. And that was regulating, you know, the size of properties and when it triggers commission review and approval and when not. So the proposed size was when you have a structure of 50,000 square feet or more, or a use that requires 50 parking spaces. So that's the threshold that we're recommending when it triggers the commission approval in the I-1 zone versus an over-the-counter permit in that zone. So if anybody has any thoughts, if they're okay with that number.
Steve,
not wedded to
50,000 just sounds like it's a large building.
So that's related to the one I can kind of think of is if you think of the Rite Aid right off of exit 16, that's a 1-story building, about 25,000 square feet. Roughly,
Right.
it's probably, maybe it's a little under. So if you added a story on top of that, that's what it would equate to.
But Steve, that's a gross of 50,000 on 2 floors, but what you have here doesn't say that. It says gross floor area, but if it was 25,000 on 1 floor and then obviously 25 on another, that would be a 50,000 square foot building. But is the 50,000 square foot building, could it be all on 1 floor and then it's double the size?
Well, yeah, so the gross floor area would be the 50,000. So if it's a 1-story building of 50,000 square feet, then it would come to you. Or if it's a 3-story building, each floor is 20, then it would come to you as well.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm not wedded to this. I'm just trying to, you know, because the industrial 1 zone was shrunk down significantly in the proposed zoning from the current area. So that was just the idea being that most of the I-1 area proposed, there are some areas, but a lot of it is away from the residential areas and is pretty intensive now in the activities that are occurring on the site. So that's just why we came up with that. But if you want to adjust, I mean, even if we sent this out to public hearing at 50,000, you can always reduce it. So that's not anything to get too hung up over at this point.
Well, that's true on one side of it. On the other side of the argument, it's hardly a serious disincentive to put it through a site plan review process.
That's fine, yeah, and if you want to reduce it now, I'm happy to change it, that's fine with me.
Say more about that, Lou? I'm just
No,
not following.
I'm a little bit concerned about that, but I'd like to hear what the public has to say. And we will still have an opportunity to change it if we think it's too large.
Steve, was this 20,020 parking spaces before?
That's a very good question. Michelle, do you have any ability to quickly, because I don't want to switch out my windows since I got that open. Can you check in the zoning regulations in the I-1 zone, what the current standard is for the site plan?
I'm pretty sure that's what it was, because I always thought that was kind of a small construction project to go for the site plan reviews that are required, but.
And I'll just touch on while she's checking that, just down below under E for manufacturing. Initially, the prior Roman numeral 4 and Roman numeral 5, which are now crossed off, we had put in some placeholders for the amount of manufacturing space dedicated for storage or retail or showroom space. And I further discussed that with the consultant, and they just had concerns about how you're ever going to quantify that and then regulate that. And then if that changes, and their recommendation was to, it should be evident on the plan submitted what the intent of the space is and not get so wedded to individual percentages. So we proposed the language, which is the new Roman numeral 3, which would take the place of 4 and 5. So I just wanted to point that out to you guys.
So it's the 20,000 square feet or more requiring 50 parking spaces or more.
Okay.
Site plan review.
So the 50 spaces stays the same, but the square footage went from 20 to 50.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. 20,000 isn't much of a building.
Right, and that would allow more, it would make it so that if it's next to a residential, the residential area wouldn't be as if it was next door to a huge supermarket type parking lot. Not that 50 spaces is that big, but it tries to soften the parking aspect for the residential abutment, right?
Could, yes, yeah, and that gets down to the making sure we have the right screening requirements and landscape requirements as part of any approval too.
Yeah. Okay.
And I'm just going to hit the yellow highlighted one because that's the only thing that was subject to change or was still unresolved. Another question, so this is, we should back up just to give you a perspective. Special permit uses in the industrial 1 zone. So this is when we're talking about the real contractor yards where they're doing the earth processing. The question that I kind of left open-ended was, do we allow contractor yards in the industrial 1 zone by site plan on smaller lots, or is it better just to have them all via special permit? I'm not wedded to one or the other, just wanted to get your sense on that.
I mean, this would be the most, oh, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, excuse me, Nick. Sometimes you've given us examples of how many parcels there are of, X, like if this is going to affect X number of parcels. Is there a number here that you can tell us?
No, because it's not as, I understand your question, your point is that, but in this instance, the I-1 parcels, a big chunk of them are much larger than 20,000 square feet. So this would regulate, what that would happen. Like if they carved up the lot into different yards and or subdivided the property, that's how this would probably come into play more.
Well, but 20,000 square feet is still almost half an acre. So it's not a tiny parcel.
I would think that, we could probably, we would probably be very interested in doing a site plan review if residential property was within a certain distance, let's say, of the proposed contractor yard. I mean, if a contractor yard was in the middle of an industrial site like, well, this is probably a bad example because of Harbor, because of Village. I can't think of what it's called now, but
Village
like
Creek.
a big giant piece like Grasso that doesn't have any houses around it, maybe wouldn't require a special permit application. But if there was a piece like this that had like an industrial piece on Bell Avenue, for example, as JJ was talking about, then that would require some kind of review.
So I also have a question in regards to the moratorium. So is that still enforced?
Yeah, that's the last item on my list related to this tonight. So I was going to go through everything and talk about what we want to do on that end. If that's okay.
Thank you, Steve.
Sure.
Are there many parcels that would meet the criteria that Commissioner Rooney is saying here of isolated, not really near residential anymore?
There are some, so we'll get to the map in a second, but the I-1 area, the majority of it doesn't necessarily abut residential. In some instances, it still does. I think maybe the question here is, so this is by special permit. Maybe I'll try to articulate it a little better. So this is what forgetting the second part of that sentence, which has the question attached. So this is allowing these contractor yards on parcels that don't exceed half an acre. So is that something, is that number sound right? Or are you not as concerned if a contractor yard is on a full acre because it's a special permit use? And then the second question is, would you consider allowing contractor yards by site plan approval if they were less than 20,000 square feet or
Are
some
these
other
the
number?
more pollution intensive ones on the list here? When we say earth processing, I'm just not sure what exactly that means in a good enough way.
So that's basically somebody that's got excavators that have piles of material and they're screening them, they're loading them into trucks. They could have asphalt, they could have gravel, anything in those kind of similar veins.
But Steve, what I was hearing before is that it really should be driven by its proximity to residential housing. And that if it's within, and I don't know what the number ought to be, but if it's, within 700 feet of residences, we might want to do one thing. If it's within 100 feet, we might want to do something else. So if we're not going to address that, then it seems to me we ought to go with more restrictive. We ought to be more restrictive and insist that it be a special permit.
Okay, and I'm fine. So I can just take out this this piece of it and then just leave it as it is. I think
I'm comfortable with that.
And is it safe to say the consideration is not only the residents that are abutting, but along the main pathways that these trucks are going to be traveling? Not saying that we're going to change, you can't really measure that, but the impact, I think, is not only the people who are right there, but the throughput of the potential of these trucks, just as a consideration, and the pollution that will bring.
Yep, no, I think that's fair.
Okay.
And just to piggyback off of everybody's comment, thank you very much. I also want to emphasize that the concentrated amount in the area where within a 5-block radius, you have 10, 20, proposed contractor yards all in one area. So it's concentrated pollution, concentrated, traffic, concentrated noise. And even though each one of them may be doing different things, it's all in one area and is providing this concentrated impact on this one neighborhood, South Norwalk, which is like a fraction part of, like a Brooklyn, New York that can be easily spread out. This is such a tiny area where you have a concentration of this type of operations. So once again, I just want to emphasize that I don't have an issue, for our small business owners who are trying to operate and transport their goods and services. I just have an issue with the concentrated nature of it in one neighborhood.
Steve, are we permitted to, under the special permit rules, are we permitted to take those issues into account in reaching a decision? There are 6 other similar facilities, within a quarter of a mile. Therefore, we believe the impact is too great and we don't approve it.
That's, so if you went down that route and you denied an application on those grounds, that's tricky. Anytime you deny an application, whether it's a special permit or a site plan, there needs to be evidence in the record to support your decision. Same thing if you approve something, obviously. But if you're going to go the denial route, you need to have a reason why the application, in your opinion, doesn't conform to one of the special permit criteria. And we don't have those specific types of standards in terms of, like if air quality was an issue, you really would need to have evidence in the record to support why you're saying this doesn't comply with that.
Right.
And that might be beyond the ability of the city to really grasp or get.
So we could use the argument, but we'd have to have other strong, convincing arguments.
I would think so.
Yeah.
There's a
Air
lot of
quality on its own is insufficient, is what I'm hearing.
I'm sorry, Nick?
You're saying air quality on its own is insufficient?
I'd say air quality without proof that what was being proposed was detrimental to the air quality. I mean, there's lots of studies that say trucks pollute or may pollute this or may pollute that, but you'd need to have, probably more site-specific data, which might be beyond your ability to request or really grasp. I mean, not to say you can't grasp it, but
theoretically though, Steve, couldn't we just say we don't want any of these yards in the city by zoning?
You can
Right.
exclude pretty much everything you want, but I don't know if that's a good approach.
Okay,
I have something to say about that comment from Nick.
Not saying that's what I want to do. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I could tell. No, it's really important that I want to get a couple of things out at this point in this conversation. The truck traffic is not going away anywhere. The need for it is obvious. And especially as we enter a green era, buildings are going to be retrofitted, construction is going to increase, and recycling of construction materials as well is going to increase. What one company in particular does, Terzian, who I'm familiar with, they recycle construction material like concrete and asphalt. They break it up and make new process stone that goes under roads and around foundations, et cetera. That material would end up in a landfill. There's a carbon cost to that. So in a way, you could look at Terzian, what they do as a green industry, because they are recycling material that would normally go to a landfill on a highway far away and turning it into a locally used material that is turned around and just sold immediately to a contractor building something. So that's important to know. The other thing is pushing the traffic onto 95 to go to Bridgeport is not a solution. Okay, pushing the traffic to go to Stanford or just saying we don't want it here is not a solution, especially when you have hundreds of businesses with thousands of employees and thousands of families being supported by the contracting industry here is one of the, I think, one of the omissions of the study, which I otherwise think there's a lot of good stuff in it. The industrial zone study, really, really a great piece of analysis, and I agree with some of the recommendations. But what I don't agree with is this idea that you can slowly zone out uses that have been historical here and are essential, absolutely essential. Because otherwise, if you can't get local building materials and you are a small contractor, you have to get on the highway, adding to traffic, adding to pollution, and go somewhere else. And you're adding to all kinds of costs, not just your own business costs, but fuel, air pollution, et cetera. It's not a green decision to say we are going to move the trucks somewhere else or further away. In fact, it does the opposite. And I would also argue that that a company like Terzian, who is being rezoned there on Boughton Street, they are Industrial 1 and they should remain Industrial 1 because they're essential, an absolutely essential business, not like other contractors and contractor yards. Hundreds of contractors rely on those couple of places that provide, Divine is another one. They provide bulk material that every contractor that you hire, that you want something done to your house, you want to, whatever it is, you want to build a swimming pool, you want to add an addition, you want to build a new house, you want to renovate. They're all getting their material locally, and they're relying on Home Depot and Lowe's and Hatch and Bailey, but they're also relying on places like Terzian. They're essential businesses. They're not to be thought of as a use that can be pushed out of town. That's all I'm saying, because an entire ecosystem or an entire economy is based on this, including many small minority-owned businesses who would be pushed out of Norwalk. These are people who have started their own businesses, entrepreneurs, working their way up, socioeconomically, providing for their families, and that's huge. It is huge. It is, and I think the study made a very good point that the heavy industrial, as they called it, and we're calling it Industrial 1, which we've always called it, we're keeping it that way, but the study called it heavy industrial. We're reducing that by 70% in Norwalk, according to the zoning recommendations in the study. So, and I'm not sure if that's accurate now, but it is definitely a 70% reduction in heavy industrial. Meanwhile, we are encouraging more green and more modern 21st century businesses with the higher floor heights, which I think is too high. I think it should be 20 feet, not 30 feet, but we can debate that later. Things like vertical farming, which I sent an article out today, but all kinds of boutique manufacturing, small manufacturing. This is a need here, and we need to adapt our zone. So that's what the industrial study is doing, and these zone changes are doing. And I agree with all that, but I do not agree, and I will defend forever the need for contractors and contractor yards. And I just think that reducing the area that they're going into, which this study is doing and we're talking about, is the direction we're heading in. I'm for that. I'm for reducing the impacts on neighbors. I am for that. I am for increased enforcement. I am for that. But I am for, I have a few, anyway, I'll stop because I'm kind of going on, but I just wanted to get that point out there that the idea of, and Nick, you just, the way you made the statement, I realized it was a little tongue in cheek, but it was a good point for me to segue into this. It's actually not green at all.
No, not at all.
Force trucks, into further reaches of wherever they can go.
All right, let's move on. Steve?
Sure. And just to point out on the page you're looking at, you'll see that the subject to review and approval of an environmental impact report's been crossed out all over the place. So we're not eliminating that requirement. We just put it in one sentence in one part of the document, so they still have to do it. Just Brian Baker pointed out, you know, it might be just better wordsmithing if you just say you got to do it everywhere. So we do require that as part of special permit. Okay. Very quickly, any thoughts on 4A Roman numeral 3? I don't know if anybody, it was in there as a placeholder. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that. I have none in terms of eliminating the requirement or keeping it. It seems the intent is to keep the you know, the principal use as that, you know, manufacturing or industrial use. That's kind of what the intent of that is. And if we don't decide tonight, it's not the end of the world.
Is there any pros or
Address it.
cons of either way, Steve? Like, do you have a preference?
No, I honestly don't. I really wish I did, but I don't.
All right, let's keep moving then.
Sure. And here's where we did, just as I referenced, for any special permit use and at your discretion for any site plan application, you can require that environmental impact report. So that's still in there. This section here is a holdover section that I just don't think is appropriate. So we think we should just take it out. It deals with the nonconformities of buildings as a result of the zone change, but I think it's just not good language and probably should just get axed out of the regulations entirely. Okay, and a couple more that shouldn't take as long. Just bear with me a sec while I track it down. Okay. All right, and so some of these are very much the same as with the I-1.
Steve, can you make that just a bit larger?
Sure. How's that?
That's
A lot
fine, thank you.
larger.
A lot larger.
Yeah,
How's that?
better. Thank you.
All right, we're getting really large now. All right, so
There's a
this
trick
was,
on Zoom for folks. If you go to your view options, where you see Steve is at the top of your screen, and if you click that down arrow, you can change the zoom, where it says zoom ratio, to increase on a presenter's screen without having them to zoom in if you ever want that trick while you're on a Zoom.
Thank you, Nick. That's a great little trick I didn't know. Thank you.
Hey, Nick, sorry, can you say that one more time where that arrow is?
Yeah, absolutely. So you see view options at the top where it says, you see the green where it says you're viewing Steve Kleppin's screen. Oh, you're on mute.
On the presentation.
Yeah.
Yeah,
view-
I see it. Yeah.
You see view
yeah.
options and there's a little down V looking arrow.
Ha,
If you click that, then you'll get zoom ratio, and you can do fit to window, which will just be however wide your screen is, and then 50, 100, 150. And then when you're zoomed in, when you hover over the screen, you'll get a hand. And if you just click and drag, you'll be able to move around the screen at the level that you want.
nice, thank you. I've been clicking stuff all night. Getting it.
Yeah, it took me a
Thank
while,
you.
but once I got that, it's helpful.
That is very helpful. Actually, when you're looking at fine print, especially.
You're probably the youngest person on the call. Thanks.
so very similar to the start of the I-1 zone. Remember, the I-2 zone is the kind of the lighter industrial. And this is what the triggers for site plan approval. I think based on the last conversation, it's probably best to leave it as is for the sake of starting the public process and the public hearing. And if we want to adjust it at a later date, we have the ability to take care of that. Same change, because we also allow, where I-2 allows heavy, light, and boutique manufacturing, I-2 allows for just the boutique and the light manufacturing. But the same principle about reducing or how to deal with the warehousing and showroom space is the same change, exact same language as proposed for the I. Just a question was within the I2 zone what is anybody's thoughts about a warehouse, which is not a distribution center, which has its own definition, by site plan on a parcel less than half an acre? Anybody have any concerns with leaving that as is or changing? I think by special permit is greater than 20,000 square feet. You need a special permit. So
Okay.
That's okay. Leave as is.
Yeah.
We're almost at the end. Same language about the environmental impact statement. Any special permit use, and at your discretion for any site plan use, you can require that. And the same language related to the nonconformity, which we're recommending to remove. I think we got like 2 more things to go through, and I think we're about done. Did the definitions, and then the other one was the bulk and height. Can you guys see that, or need me to blow that up?
We can blow it up ourselves.
This is true. I'm going to do it anyway, so I can see it. So the one change here is in column B, which deals with what we talked about. The prior draft had the transitional height plane. What we did was kept the heights, no change to any of that. But what we added language, and it's the same language in both zones, I1 and I2. So basically it says when your property abuts a residential zone, that you have to step the building back starting at the second floor 10 feet, and then step it back each additional story another 10 feet. So it achieves the same goal of the transitional height plane. It's just a little easier to quantify and regulate. So I think that change makes sense, and it's pretty easy to visualize that part of it. Everybody okay with that?
Mike, is this the where you were talking about earlier about the height considerations?
Yeah, yes, thank you for reminding me that 30-foot minimum first floor and on both is or 40, it's 30 feet and up to 85 feet, right? So varies a little bit, but it just seems, so I looked at the language in the industrial study what that was based on, because it seems very tall. It seems like a transfer station height. And there is a comment that the consultant made that modern industry requires higher ceilings. I'm not going to argue with that. Because of air handling equipment, regulations for air pollution, a lot of difference from what it was 40, 50 years ago when warehouses were built. So manufacturing does require higher ceilings, there's no question. But in the study, the consultant had recommended 20 feet for artisanal manufacturing, boutique manufacturing, for a potential zone that we're not actually creating, but it was in an artisanal zone. But for bakeries, small bakeries, et cetera, they were recommending 20 feet. I think we ought to just stick 20 feet in both of these zones and leave it at that, because 30 feet just seems, 30 feet is 3 stories, 3 traditional stories. And to have that as a minimum just seems highly restrictive. As much as we want to draw, the consultant made an excellent argument for, if we want to draw in modern 21st century businesses that are non-polluting, smaller, because large manufacturers are not locating here anymore, but small are. And there's a big need for, especially with maybe the global economy is retracting because of war and pandemic. An economic argument is easily made that we can return to some manufacturing, which means higher paying jobs and a better economy, a more diverse economy for Norwalk. I get all that, but to put it all into a building height that just seems to me ideal but restrictive it doesn't, it seems like there's so much good stuff that we're talking about, but suddenly these buildings get huge when you think about it, 30-foot first floor. It's going to increase the cost a lot to someone. And I understand, you know, the higher floors above are meant to subsidize the manufacturing. That's the whole idea, you know, whether it's residential or office on the upper floors. That's a great idea. You allow, you know, someone to build a building that they could run a manufacturing business that they normally wouldn't be able to afford to build by incentivizing and monetizing the upper floors. But I'm just curious what other people's opinion about this is, because maybe I'm just looking at it from one perspective here.
Well, you're not restricting it by reducing the minimum height, right? We're still allowing them to go as high as up to whatever they need to do what they want. What we're saying is, if you want to build a small spot, you don't need that height, you can do that.
That's right.
That's the essence of it. Steve, is there a reason we wouldn't do that? Like,
No, I think that the consultant's rationale is that based on what they're seeing for the kind of business that industrial users they thought could work in Norwalk, was that they needed that higher floor to floor in that ground floor. I mean, I think it's possible for somebody to build to that 30 feet, but it doesn't necessarily have to look like it's a 30-foot first floor, because they may get a tenant that doesn't need that, and they probably could fit that space out differently. So I think that's kind of where the design aspect of it comes in versus the utility piece of it.
I'm not exactly sure what you meant by that, Steve, but I agree with Mike. I think that a requirement of a 30-foot first floor is too much. Especially if somebody's going to build a new building for a tenant, they're going to fit it up how that tenant wants. So if they need 30 feet, they can do that. But I don't know that we should make that a minimum.
Yeah, I'm fearful of, we're putting all this energy and time into this, and it's needed, right? Although the rationale for the industrial study was smart, cleaning up the code, encouraging new business, economic growth, all of that, more jobs. All of that's good, but anything that might restrict that potentially, to me, is working against what we're going after. And 20, since they recommended 20 feet already in a zone that for artisanal, they use the word artisanal, which I hate that word. What does that mean, actually? But anyway, but for smaller businesses, okay, artsy businesses, if they needed 20 feet and they were recommending 20 feet in that zone, but those uses are included in these two zones. And suddenly we are telling an artisanal business, well, guess what? You have to go 30 feet or 40. It just doesn't make any sense to me. And am I right, Steve? We're allowing the uses that were going to be in the original consultant zone for our, more artisanal and really smaller boutique manufacturing. And we do allow it in these two zones, but we're not allowing a 20-foot ceiling height on the first floor.
Yeah, I mean, if it's you want to look, we can drop it to 20 if you.
I think we should, and I think, you know what, we can change it some other time, but to go in with a zone change with something like that, it seems a little extreme to me.
Okay.
So if they want 30 feet, they can do 30 feet.
They can do it. We're only saying a minimum. We're not saying
Yeah.
maximum.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
Okay, and one more thing to do, and then just we move on to the next phase. And that's just to talk about the changes to the map, which I'll bring up now. Okay, so is that big enough for everybody to see?
Yes,
Okay.
it's big enough for me to see at least.
Okay, so, and I have blow ups of these too, so you don't have to, I'm gonna go into each area. So I think the one area that we still had some discussion on was the South Norwalk, where a few of the boundaries lie, because I think the maps I showed you were a little bit unclear, so I wanted to just clarify that a little bit. the first slide, I should probably put it on slideshow. Okay, that's probably. So this is the actual plan recommendations, what they put together for the rezoning using the existing zoning and the proposed. So a few areas where there were changes since we last talked about and some recommendations on looking at rezoning are, this was my mistake up here, the red circle. I inadvertently changed the zone by accident, so I wanted to just clarify that in the map. This one parcel or group of parcels along South Smith Street, potentially the Hatch and Bailey site, and then the majority residential properties around on Boughton Street. So I'm going to go through each one of those areas really quick. The first one is the red. It's right off of Ely Ave. Again, this was my mistake. I just missed that in the mapping. So those parcels were inadvertently flagged. So they should remain and into the the neighborhood business mix.
They would remain neighborhood business. Is that what you're saying?
Right. Yeah, they
Yes.
were inadvertently captured with the other properties.
Got it. Okay.
South Main, which is off on this side here, they were proposed to go into the I2 zone, but really the majority of those properties are residential, and it's probably more appropriate for the neighborhood for them to remain or be officially zoned residential.
Good. That's all I can say.
Okay.
That was a real red flag, that little strip there. I was concerned about that.
So this
And I'm
would be
sure JJ, you were as well.
So the third one is if this reverts to where the school is going to go, then this should be probably rezoned. So, but that's pending. So that's another consideration. And the fourth one was what I mentioned on Boughton Street. Right now, the majority of these parcels are residential. There might be a sprinkling of a contractor yard in here, but the idea initially was that maybe it makes sense to have a consistent zone across the east side of Boughton Street, but then it's just probably better to leave these majority residential areas residential, so you're not conflicting with the residential on the west side of the street. So those would be the final map changes we would recommend for the package that goes out for public hearing. So any questions on any of the map changes?
I think on the Boughton Street, you were mixing east and west, because the west side of the street where the word Boughton is, that's the west side of the street to me, right?
This is west, yeah. Did I say
Yeah,
east?
so, yes, I think you did. So that has the residential. Would they just move the whole west side of the street and just move the purple line to the center of the road and then just only have it on the east side of the street?
Right, so what you're seeing here, so it's a little confusing. Right where, if you can follow my cursor along, that's actually the railroad track. So
Oh, it's not the street. Okay, I got you.
Yeah.
You're right. So it is divided that way. Okay,
Right.
thank you.
This is
Yeah.
Steve, though, but you're saying there's
I
a bit
thought
of
that
an,
was the center line of the road. Okay, gotcha.
Right,
there'll be a bit of an island of residential in the middle of
right,
the industrial.
right. So there's industrial, and
Industrial.
and then the residential in the middle.
Okay,
And that's how it functions today.
right.
So are you proposing to leave it that way then?
To leave the middle ones residential, the proposal is to change these from industrial 1 to industrial 2.
Yeah, so over time, if any of those businesses leave, it will go to a lighter use.
Oh, yeah, in the I1 properties,
But
yes.
isn't industrial too, isn't that the boutique?
That the industrial 2 allows for a bunch of things, but it does allow for the light manufacturing and the boutique, not the heavy.
Yeah, the I2, the I1, basically heavy industrial or I1, according to the consultant, was being reduced that area by 70% across the city. Again, I don't know how accurate that is. I just remember reading that in this study. But I'm going to go back to something I said earlier, which is, I'm going to bring it up again, is that because we have the map in front of us. Some businesses are essential businesses, and for instance, Terzian on Boughton Street, I would highly recommend leaving that in I-1, which it is now. There's contiguous properties there, probably they show up on that map, I think 5 or 6. It's on the railroad tracks. It's been heavy industrial forever. It is, yes, it's a narrow street, but there's some enforcement issues with parking on there. Everyone that has moved there has not, there's like a railroad dividing that, not like it is a railroad. I don't know why I said that. Dividing it from the rest of South Norwalk. Yes, there are residential uses there, but I would argue that Terzian should be kept in an I-1 zone and not make that essential. It's different than all other businesses. It is an essential business providing raw materials to hundreds of contractors, whereas other businesses that are going to be made non-conforming are not. Those are contractors that are doing projects, not supplying materials for multiple hundreds of contractors. There is, again, an economy based on Terzian, and I would respect the history of that long-based Norwalk company with hundreds of customers, small contractors, and an increased enforcement in that area in terms of parking on the street, et cetera. But keep that I-1 so that property owner is not restricted from doing what they do now. And I know that they can continue in non-conforming because I brought that up at the last meeting. And I know they can sell the property as a non-conforming and to someone else who continues the use. But I don't see why we would alienate what I see again as essential business in terms of providing raw material, and a green business in terms of recycling construction materials into readily usable materials that are used locally. You can't get any greener than that.
Well, that brings up an interesting point. Like, is there a notion of a business like that fitting a different category, and whether or not that would fit in the equation here differently? Like, are they truly I-1? Are they I-2? Are they something completely different? And is that a different class of business or industry that we want to encourage?
That's a good question. Yeah, I don't think I think it would fall under I-1 naturally because it's earth processing. It is described in I-1 now. And there's not a lot of these really in town. It's not a business, it's not an easy business, and it's not a business people are going to be expanding into, I don't think. But I don't, and those are the businesses we're most concerned about impacts, right? So, but can we evolve with this whole industrial study? Can we take all the good stuff that this study represents and move it forward? Because I agree with most of it, but still not penalize anyone who's doing business now and has been for generations in town. That's kind of like what I'm concerned about. It's like, can we make this as painless as possible for the existing businesses while still doing all the other stuff that's incentivizing other property owners to redevelop into something cleaner and better? But you're always going to need Terzian.
I don't see how this is hurting him in any way, number one. And number two, if we change that little bit of zone to I-1 and leave the rest as I-2, that's spot zoning. I don't think we can do that.
Yeah, we can. I don't agree with that. I think that
I don't agree with it either.
I think we're looking at the traditional use there. And we've done this with this map, actually.
Can you show the map again, Steve, while we're having the conversation? Do you mind flashing that back up?
Sure. Yeah, I see your point, Lou, because I also am, I don't want to start gerrymandering and spot zoning either. But in terms of an unusually essential business, that an exception should be made, I think. And I'm advocating for someone who I know is supplying raw materials to hundreds of contractors with thousands of employees, and you can't, and it does restrict there's no expansion of buildings. Steve, maybe you could elaborate on this in terms of what having a non-conforming use, and Richard, you would know about this as well, I think, in terms of if you had a well, you might, I'm guessing you might, having a non-conforming use, when you want to expand your business, let's say, would the city then say, well, you're a non-conforming use, you can't expand it, or you can't even you can't improve a building on it?
So
That's correct. It's called an intensification of a non-conforming use.
That's correct, but, and I think I laid it out in my memo, and I've had numerous conversations with Mr. Jersey and his attorney. Most of those contractor yards, the ones that are going to be non-conforming as a result of the zone changes, they're using pretty much 100% of those sites now. So I don't see how it's negatively impacting them to change them to non-conforming. No one's convinced me yet of that argument. Second part is, Attorney Suchi had proposed some language which would provide flexibility for these existing contractor yards. For example, if you had all the piles of material on the north end, but you had an idea where you wanted to build a building on the north end and wanted to shift the piles to the other side of the site, I think it's fair to allow somebody to, under those, that's operating with a legal contractor yard, to shift the operations within the site. They can add additional buildings, move material from one side to the other, and I put a caveat in, provided that it doesn't, if it's going to butt up to a residential zone, that it has to have a bigger buffer. But I haven't seen the argument yet where if somebody's already using 100% of their site, how them becoming non-conforming affects any part of their operation. If somebody could convince me of that, then I would probably change my tune, but I just haven't been convinced of that.
And all right, so then that I'm following, but I would also argue, what detriment would it be to keep a I-1 designation there in terms of, let's say, 30 years into the future, if at that point a manufacturing facility might want to go there, since we're reducing I-1 by 70% around the city, why not keep a functioning I-1 business that is not planning on going anywhere anytime soon, as far as everybody knows, keeping it I-1 and not even making it non-conforming? I mean, what would be the advantage to make it non? If it's an essential business and it's something that we're always going to need, why disincentivize that?
Well, if you look at the allowed or proposed allowed uses within the different zones, there are things added to the I-2 zone that you can't do now that are incentives for change in terms of allowing additional height, allowing some different uses like residential or other things that can offset the development costs on, for other parts of the project. So that's kind of, there's a trade-off with that. So there's some things that, we're taking away your right to do certain uses. A lot of the uses that we're proposing to remove from like this particular area I would think are uses that are the residential neighbors that are in proximity would probably would be elsewhere. And I mean, you could probably argue that.
Yeah. Well, I would argue that we've actually approved a lot of residential around the building. It's like somebody has a farm. It happens all over the country, right? There's a farming area, gets developed, and all the new neighbors get together and say, you know what, we can't stand that smell of those horses anymore and those cows. You got to shut down, that chicken farm stinks and you got to stop it. And so anyway, I'm making a simplistic argument. I realize, because I'm all for all the motives here of reducing the impacts, especially in an area like South Norwalk, all for it.
So let's leave this and see what the public has to say.
Yes, we're not going anywhere with this right now.
Right. We're not
So
going to
let's
resolve it.
Well, you know how
Can
I
I
feel,
make-
and my position is now clear in terms of, I don't think we
Absolutely.
should downzone a thriving essential business
We get it.
in a historical area, where it's been there historically for a long time. Yeah, anyway, yes, I don't need to go any further.
Steve, if we're going to move this on to a public hearing, which it sounds like is going to be the case, would it be possible for the individual owners of the individual properties that are going to be rendered non-conforming to be specifically notified as to the date of a hearing? And the other thing that I was wondering about, as you mentioned in your letter that you've been thinking about it a lot, so have I. And I've made it clear over the years that I've been sitting on this board that I'm not a fan of creating nonconformities, but in the state of Connecticut dissertation of public policy on nonconforming uses, the hope is, and the reasoning behind the 50% rule and the other rules having to do with nonconforming uses, is that eventually the nonconforming use will become a conforming use. And, in my life living in Norwalk until the last 10 years, I never, ever thought that a contractor yard was going to be worth more than waterfront, but it is now. So there needs to be, in my humble opinion, an incentive for people whose properties have become non-conforming to make them voluntarily become conforming by, if it's now a residential use, perhaps relaxing the square footage requirements or something so that more density would be allowed to increase the value. Just a thought. But I think primarily the individual owners of the properties that are not Terzians, that have, well-known land use attorneys as their attorneys who are going to keep them abreast of what's going on, I think they should know and be able to participate in the public hearing.
So statutorily, we're not required to notice.
I understand. I know we're not
Right.
required, but
What we've done with every zone change, so when we rezoned South Norwalk in 2018, 2019, West Ave, Wall Street, and then East Norwalk more recently, we've notified every property owner. So we'll do that. We'll do that again with this. This one will be a really big list considering the whole area we're doing, but we will notify everybody.
Is that number? Anything else on this?
Was that every property owner in addition to every resident?
So it's the listed property owner on that of that address, whatever the address is, based on the tax assessor's record.
So if the property owner does not live on the property and a bunch of renters do, will they get notification?
No.
That's
I don't
not
have,
good.
I don't even know if we have that. Like if you rent something, I don't think we have any way of knowing where you live if you just rent something. I don't think there's any way to pull that information.
How will this information be broadcast, be disseminated? Will it be on the news? Will it be in the newspapers? Will it be on Facebook? How will people know to come to this public hearing?
So typically what happens with this kind of public hearing is, in this case, we'll be sending out the notice to the property owners, and then we run the legal notice in the paper. We don't do any broadcasting beyond that. I mean, anybody wants to talk about it, I'm happy to chat with them about it. Or if there's groups that want to get together and talk about it, that's something we're happy to do.
I think that's probably been one of the stumbling blocks in getting people informed who are directly impacted. They're not property owners, however, they are the ones impacted by all these changes.
Will the applicant, Judge, are you done? I'm sorry.
I
Are you
am.
done? Yes, okay.
Thank you.
If nobody else had a question, I was gonna ask Steve, if the applicant, is the consultant planning on doing a presentation of the industrial study, or are you only addressing the zone changes in this, which could seem mysterious to people if they don't understand the rationale from the industrial study?
So the industrial zone study work for the most part with the study is kind of done. I mean, there were a couple little loose ends that they've tied up. They're going to wait for the final map changes based on what you guys decide and incorporate those into the plan. But I don't think there's anything else planned in terms of presentation of the study.
Well, I guess it'll be, so the study is very good. It has just so much data in it about trends, et cetera, right? And I think, well, all of the zone change we're talking about is based on what's in that study. And I would urge everyone, if you haven't, I know we've been talking about it for a long time, but I went back recently and read the whole thing carefully, including all of the arguments. And again, there was a couple of omissions I thought they made in terms of the importance of contractors to the local economy and how green it is to keep contractors local on the highway. But those arguments are going to be part of the public hearing process. So I would then just advise you, Steve, if staff, as overworked as you guys are, if you could put together a presentation based on the industrial study to summarize it, review the major points, and then present a kind of cohesive argument to get to the reason for the public hearing, which is changing the industrial zones. Because one of the things that I think is missing and the community should know is that if it's true, we're reducing heavy industrial by 70% around the city.
Is that true? I know it's in the study, Steve, is that right? Is that like from an application standpoint?
I'd have to double check, but like if you think about, and just to say, I think I presented this to both zoning commission and planning commission, and possibly even planning committee of council at one. It was probably a while ago because this has been going on for a little bit. But
we have the presentation already ready.
Yeah, I mean, when we do the public hearing on this, I would anticipate going over those materials again, because as you said, not all the public is tuned in when the process is going on. But if just the I-1 zone, like think about East Norwalk, a lot of that I-1 area is proposed to get rezoned to I-2. So that's a pretty good amount of land as well.
Yeah.
Kind of factors in.
And Norton is still an outlier that is going to be dealt with separately. Is that correct?
It's proposed to go to the I-2 at this point, and it's more because it's more protective than the I-1 zone.
But is Norton a I-1 right now?
Restricted industrial.
It's restricted, right? So it wouldn't be in the downgrade. I don't know if that counts as a downgrade. Anyway, I hear what you're saying.
Is that it, Steve?
That's it for that. The last piece. So we have to send out the referrals with that, and there's we talked about the referrals with the North 7 application. Where I think the best approach is to actually amend the plan of conservation and development, which I sent out in that memo. It's a pretty simple little amendment to that, but that's a longer referral window. That's a 65-day window, and there's other agencies we have to refer where we wouldn't in just a simple zone change. So it's going to take a little while to get that started. So to get back to JJ's question from, it was probably an hour ago now, we're just getting back to it.
2 hours ago.
It may have been 2 hours ago. So the moratorium, and I don't remember the exact date, but it's set to expire in mid-June. So about 5 or 6 weeks from now. I think the earliest we can do a public hearing is probably a month after that. So one thing I was going to suggest is that we continue.
Wait, did you
or-
say a month after? Shouldn't it be a month before the public hearing? So this way we can get the facts?
Right, so I think we
But-
need to extend the moratorium until the public hearing on the industrial
Oh.
zones is done.
Thank
So I-
you, thank you.
So that's a separate, unfortunately, that's a text amendment, which we have to deal with in May. So I think we can hit those two things in May, get that, carry it forward for a couple of months to get us through the public hearing on the changes we were talking about tonight, and then it's all done, said and done sometime in June or maybe early July. at the latest.
Okay.
Does a text amendment need a public hearing?
Yes,
Yes.
So, but that's generated by the city, so that'll be that'll be like a zone change, basically.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we extended the moratorium once before, so at this one, it's only going to be a couple of months.
Thank you, Steve.
Okay.
And does that include the moratorium on residential
Yes.
yeah, okay,
Yeah, it'll be the same exact ones.
okay.
Ready to move on? Okay. These things are short and sweet. I need a motion to approve the minutes of our March 16th meeting, and Galen has moved. Is there a second? And Richard and Tammy second. Any comments, questions, corrections? If not, all those in favor will do it by a hand raise. And it's unanimous. Good. Any further comments, Steve?
No, nothing. Thank you.
Okay. Comments of commissioners?
How's the overall rewrite going, Steve? Have you gotten drafts yet?
Yes, and I have a deadline of tomorrow, which I'm going to partially meet to get them comments back, with the idea of getting the rest of the comments back to them Monday.
Awesome. That's exciting. And then after that, when do you think we'll get a glimpse of it?
I think probably end of May or June.
Very exciting.
Then you'll have a couple of months to stew on it before we start the public hearing on that.
Right. Yeah, we don't want to do that during the summer.
No.
Anything else? All right, if not, I would, excuse me, entertain a motion to adjourn, and Richard's hand goes up very quickly. Is there a second? Galen seconds. All those in favor? All right, it's unanimous.
Good night, everybody.
Good
night.
night. Be well.
Steve, can you stay on for just a minute?
Why don't you call me if it's probably
Okay,
better?
I'll do that.
Yeah.
Good night, everyone.
Night.
Right.